call this session of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Mail.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Thank you. To go over the agendas moving forward, actually, let's go backwards one night. Last night, the council had its first council retreat in the month of January. We discussed priorities for moving forward. We will have another meeting next Tuesday starting at 6:30 in the hydrangea room regarding priorities and the budget. Those meetings are open to the public, so if you'd like to attend, it's at 6:30 in the hydrangea room. And then we're back here next Wednesday evening on January 27th. We will have the president of Washington Adventist Hospital here to do a presentation and have a discussion with us. We will also be voting on the first reading ordinance of a budget amendment and a resolution closing Ann Street for Crossroads Farmers Market. As people remember, last week Ms. Dudley from Crossroads was here. I have to say I'm sorry that two of our council members did not hear the excellent presentation by Ms. Dudley. The city is very lucky to have someone of her expertise, not only in the United States, but internationally, that works on food issues. We will also tentatively look at a resolution authorizing the architect to proceed with the library design and a resolution for appointments to committees. We have two work sessions scheduled for next week, one with the Safe Roadways Committee and the City Manager's quarterly report. Moving to Wednesday, February 3rd, we will have the second reading of the budget amendment, and then we will also have a work session reviewing a potential ZTA amendment regarding medical marijuana dispensaries. That has been, well, it was introduced and then not publicly discussed yet at the county level. It was introduced by Councilmember Tom Hucker. So we will have a work session on that February 3rd. We will also have a work session on multifamily and business recycling programs and a discussion of an ordinance banning plastic bags. And then taking us to Saturday, February 6th, we will have the first of our community conversations, and this one will be here in the auditorium and some of the other rooms in the community center, and it'll focus on affordable housing. There's more information on that on the city website. And then on February 10th, we will return to the noise ordinance and have the first reading of the noise ordinance and a first reading of an ordinance amending the city code on fees, and a work session on a presentation and discussion of streetscape manual. And that'll take us to President's Weekend.
Clarification.
Yes.
On the February 3rd matter about cannabis, I thought you said, or maybe I misheard you, there was going to be a work session on that.
Yes.
But it's listed here on the rolling agenda as a resolution.
Yeah, we actually just changed it last week when we heard that it wasn't going to have public comment this week.
Okay, so it's a work session.
It is a work session.
Not a resolution.
No.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Now we'll turn to public comments. If someone would like to make a public comment, Ms. Lovelace, we can get you a microphone. Otherwise, if you're able to, you can come to the podium, state your name and address.
Hello, my name's Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. I got a couple of questions I want to ask you tonight. I may not be here next week. If I can't make it, I want to ask the question now so everybody knows. Washington Adventist Hospital is coming, and I want them to know for sure. Do the people here know about a lawsuit going on with Washington Adventist Hospital? There's a big thing on the TV, on commercials all the time, about unnecessary stents being performed by Washington Adventist Hospital. And I'm wondering if that's being done to gain money for their building operation or their transfers, and to help with their move, or if it's just a bunch of doctors who are getting the hospital in trouble as a result of this, or what. But that, I think, should be looked into by the public here at Tacoma Park. because it affects Tacoma Park. Whatever happens at that hospital affects Tacoma Park directly. And there's a huge lawsuit going on by a lawyer company called DeAngelis or something like that. And I think we should look into that. It's on TV quite often on the Antenna TV channel and on the Justice Network television. It comes on quite often. It's been coming on for months. And I wonder if people here are aware of that. They should be aware of that. And I want you to ask the president of the hospital what he thinks about that and how that's affecting this hospital move. Second thing I want to do is ask and see what we're doing about getting solar-powered, card-powered generators for charging automobiles up. You know, automobile chargers for electric cars. And I'd like to see if we can get it solar-powered. If we can do that, some of us will not even have to rely on fossil fuels at all for their automobiles. If we can do that, Tacoma Park should lead the way in that. And I'd like to see a couple of pumps right out here on Maple Avenue. That would be great. Instead of saying fill her up, we could say charge her up. The hell with fossil fuels. We don't need them anymore. And we're starting to prove it. We can get away from it. Because look what it's doing to our climate. Look what it did to our December, the hottest December on record, in human record, here this year. And we must do something to stop this relentless destruction of the environment. And I think the car chargers would be the best thing to do. Solar-powered car chargers would be the best thing we could do for our environment, because cars really pump out a lot of pollution, a lot of the greenhouse gases. And if we can get our automobiles and our transportation system away from that, we have made a big, huge stride. And I'll really be happy. I'll probably actually find a party to go to if we can do it. But I think we can do it. We're right on the threshold of doing it. So why can't we do it? Do that, and also find out the truth about what's going on with that hospital. I mean, I'm not saying they're guilty of any kind of shenanigans. I don't know. They have saved my life, and they've saved other people's lives. And anyone out there tonight, I want to thank Larry Callahan and Nathan Harrington for taking me out this week. Nathan took me down to the Martin Luther King parade in Anacostia, and I marched in the parade with the peace sign. And Larry Callahan's been taking me to the meetings the last few times you've seen me down here. Larry has brought me down. He can't do it anymore because it's taking time out of his work. And it's really interfering with him. And I want to thank those people from the bottom of my heart for what they are doing for me. And I'd like to see if we can get other people to help me get to the meetings too, because this means a lot to me. This is my life. So please, anyone out there who hears this and knows of anybody who could push me just a couple of blocks to the meeting, it would be fine. I'd love it. You can always call me up on my phone number, which is 240-305-1189. Call me anytime. My phone's right with me all the time in my pocket or on my table. So thank you very much, everybody, for letting me share. I want to tell everybody out there, get involved with your city. Get involved with your community. Get involved with your country. We can make a big difference this year. I know we can. I feel it in my bones, which I feel a lot of pain in my bones too. But I feel a lot of hope in there too that we can make a difference. You know, one person can make a difference by becoming peace delegate and by doing a lot of demonstrations. Other people can make a difference as one person too. There's no reason that you can say I'm just one person, I can't make a difference, because that's a lot of bull. That's a cop-out. The real story is one person can make a difference. Martin Luther King made a difference, didn't he? Let us carry on after what Dr. Martin Luther King showed us. Let us carry on where he left off. Tacoma Park, we can do it. Thank you very much. Love it, love it, love it.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelace. If anyone else would like to speak, you can.
My name is Lorraine Pearsall. I live on 7708 Tacoma Avenue in North Tacoma, and I'm also Vice President of Historic Tacoma. Both are relevant to what I want to say tonight. I'd like to...
Ms. Pearsall, sorry, before you begin, I know you requested a little extra time, so I just wanted to make sure folks knew that.
Thank you.
Beforehand you had, and so
Thank you.
you have 5 minutes.
I appreciate that. Okay, and I will try to do that. I'm talking about the Montgomery County Master Plan and the problems we're having with it, both in process and substance. I'm going to go back to the really excellent 2002 agreement entered into by Montgomery College, the City of Tacoma Park, Montgomery County, and Historic Tacoma, which set the tone for the type of process that was envisioned for any alteration, construction, or revitalization of existing buildings. It was really a very serious document, entered into in good spirit, and all the parties agreed it would be part of our code, and it is today part of our city code. And I took the opportunity to really paraphrase it a little bit here, because the language was crafted very carefully to show the intent, which is always very important, is quite clear. And so when you read this document in its entirety, and not just in isolated phrases, really what it's saying is that in order to avoid friction in the future and continue a good and unique relationship, there would be collaborative consultation between the parties at the earliest practicable stage during the planning for any alteration, construction, or revitalization of exterior of existing buildings. And that is a pretty good summary of the intent of this document. I'm also going to read to you, talking about process, because I'm having real problems with process. I think my whole neighborhood is. Back in December of 2009, and you may notice a similarity again, December rushing 2009 for a submittal and update, Bruce Williams and our council member at that time, Josh Wright, wrote to the college. I'd like this on the record. We are asking that you suggest a realistic process by which we may move forward towards solutions, that we work on and review the update while still in draft, that no submission is made to MHEC before the city has an opportunity to review and comment, and that no funding requests are submitted to the state or county level for the Tacoma Park campus without review and comment from the City of Tacoma Park. That actually is the collaborative process that was envisioned in the 2002 agreement, and a process in good spirit, which back in 2009 we were not seeing, and we are continuing to not see, unfortunately. So the college held a short informational meeting on December 10th to inform us of the concept they're pushing on to their board and to the Maryland MHEC, Higher Education Commission. Only Paul and I came because it wasn't well advertised at all. During the meeting, they showed a slide, schematic for this concept, provided no documents for distribution or study, no information on any actual height, square footage, open space loss, or tree loss, which was obvious that I was seeing, nor did they provide the report they had written on our campus for their report and has to exist at this point. So that, again, doesn't sound like collaboration to me. It sounds like secrecy. It sounds like the exact opposite of that agreement. Excuse me. To touch on the substance a little bit of what I saw, because I know my neighbors are concerned. The expansion they are planning right now encompasses New York and Fenton. New York is a residential street for sure. They are envisioning buildings the size and scale of the very large student services building, which we call the Nunley Building, at the corner of New York and Fenton, as their model for coming down narrow New York Avenue. With 3 tall commercial stories, the building is quite huge. It's the hugest building there, and extremely inappropriate to bring down the block, and in fact, it is the exact opposite of what we had negotiated with the college going back in time, low-scale 2-story buildings. So I'm very concerned about this. I am concerned about a large loss of open space on the campus, which makes it quite unique. It's trees. I feel that residents will lose light and air with these changes, and it will transform the character of the campus. from a low-scale, treed residential campus to a large commercial institutional center. They're also proposing to tear down Falcon Hall, Science North and South. I saw in the space occupied by Falcon Hall and Science South a huge glass semicircle. You may see that tonight, very prominently sited on beautiful and historic Tacoma Avenue, its scale and magnitude inappropriate for a gateway into our residential community. This building will be the new Math and Science Center. The volume and square footage of the buildings appears to vastly increase from what I could see. No numbers were provided for study, but they certainly look like they are doubling in size. This does mean we will lose open space and trees. Also, the college does not have adequate parking infrastructure here to support their presence even right now, and that's a great problem to Silver Spring. And they're planning a huge mass of density. Now, the major substantive issue in North Tacoma is moving expansion to the west. That is something you all should know the college said they would do in the 1990s. They have taken absolutely no planning steps in all these years. This must be 15, 20 years to really solidify the public storage buildings and to use even their own property, a leftover 1 acre space they got from the Giant Bakery. This has been quite a sore point, and they basically said we're going to use up all the space here, and then we'll go get those.
Great.
And
Thank you, Ms.
yes.
Pearsall. You can
Okay.
submit the rest of your.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Good evening. Frances Phipps, 7210 Holly Avenue. For those of you who don't know me, I have been coming before City Council since 1972 to comment on Montgomery College's expansion plans. Those days, they used bulldozers and took houses down. These days, they're far more subtle. The end result is the same. They're going to build what they want to build. I want to make 2 points tonight. One is process, that Lorraine talked about, and the other is design. The process is really appalling. It is very, very difficult to understand how a public institution, publicly funded, can completely ignore the jurisdiction in which it's located, not only Tacoma Park, but Montgomery County as well. Park and Planning has said that they have to go through mandatory referral regarding certain buildings and their design. And I don't know if you recall about, maybe it was 2 years ago, when they were proposing something and we found a flaw, a technical flaw, and they pulled that. And they said, well, we'll sit and talk. They're coming back now. You don't know what they're going to tell you. They're going to say what they're showing you is a concept. It's not in stone, but it's going forward next week to the Board of Trustees for approval, and the week after that to the state for funding. They know exactly what the square footage is. You know, this just shows you. There's no staff analysis because apparently, I'm assuming, the staff was not provided anything to analyze. That is not only inappropriate, it is rude. They are a visitor in our midst. They have not learned that they have to be neighborly to the jurisdiction in which they're located. I'm not going to go on about process. I'm going to speak about design because perhaps we have more control there. And I'm just going to put out general ideas for design controls. New York Avenue, 2/3 of that avenue between Tacoma and Chicago are intensely residential with some of the most beautiful structures in the city. What faces that, what is built across from that, should replicate the style, the breaking up of masses, and the low scale, so they do not offend and transform the quality of life. Excuse me, I'm going over a little. All right, that's a very critical overall design concept. New York Avenue is really sacred. Now, Fenton Street, I think they've already violated. Years ago when they put up Nunley, I said to the mayor at that time, aren't you embarrassed? That's our gateway from the east to Tacoma Park, and all the signage is the college. We don't have our big signage there, and it looks like Silver Spring. You look at that big glass that is facing the railroad track, it would be a great building in Silver Spring. Is it a great building in Tacoma Park? I say no. However, there is one advantage that Fenton has. There's a big change in grade on a portion of Fenton, and they are able to recess a major part of their structure underground. I went to an institution that built a brand new library, a very famous one, up in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, and they put 2/3 of their library underground. We're talking about a math and science building that they want to build. That's the first one out. He'll probably talk about that. They're going to have labs. The labs can be underground. Much can be hidden down underneath the ground. It does not have to dominate and change the skyline. The second thing is, in terms of design, and I'll stop because I know I'm going over, is I think you want to regulate the amount of glass. I will say there's one very, I find attractive, and I think it was due to community involvement, aspect of the Nunley building, which is that first community center as you come in. One side, New York Avenue, is very different from the other side, which is all glass. They have broken up, their windows are to scale and so on. I think what you want to say to them is that we're going to come back with design solutions. If they're just in concept stage, which he may tell you they are, then you can have input. That the glass, the amount of glass should be proportional to the amount of surface. There should be broken up of volumes, no straight, no semicircle, all modern, aren't we edgy kind of building. And that Fenton and New York Avenue are distinctly different areas and should be treated as such.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comments this evening?
Good evening. My name is Julie Schmid, and I live at 7710 Tacoma Avenue. I think members of my neighborhood have already spoken about the concerns about Falcon Hall and Science North and South. I just want to echo their concerns about process and meaningful consultation with, first of all, the community that surrounds the college, but also Tacoma Park, the city itself. But I also want to raise the issue of the daycare center. I mean, part of what came up during that earlier presentation at the college, which, I'll echo Lorraine's concerns about how widely advertised that was, as somebody whose property literally abuts the college. There was, very little notice. I saw something on our neighborhood listserv, but nothing, no direct notice to members of the immediate community. But I have received no real information about the closing of the daycare center or plans for that property. That property borders my property. I am not aware of any public information that's been circulated about the close date or about plans. People in my neighborhood are left to sort of rumor and innuendo. We're hearing various things from various sources, but nothing official from the college. I have real concerns about what the plans are for that property after the daycare closes. Again, nothing's being shared with the community. Are they planning to put it on the market? Are they planning to repurpose it? No information. So, that for me is a serious concern. I would love to get real information on what's happening with the daycare center. I think there's no reason for the college not to share that with the community as a whole. And, I just want to say I'm pleased that members of the college will be here to present to this, to the council tonight. But from my point of view, as somebody who has a job where there's a lot of consultation and shared decision-making, I don't think a presentation at this stage in the game, given, how soon they're going to the board and to MHEC, counts as consultation. I think it's telling the city of Tacoma Park what they plan to do and not consulting with the jurisdiction, and I just, find that inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Krastowski, 7708 Tacoma Avenue. I think you're starting to get an idea of what's going on in North Tacoma and neighboring East Silver Spring. But realize, make no mistake about it, this is going to be the most massive construction undertaking in the history of the city of Tacoma Park. If their sketches, if their plans that they told us and didn't provide us are true, we're going to be talking about 10 to 15 years of commercial scale demolition and construction with all the attendant problems, street closings, sediment runoff, noise, air pollution, et cetera, that's caused by these things. The college does not have a great track record of mitigating impacts of their construction either, as we know, given the recent construction of P3, which is in my backyard. This college, as Francis mentioned, is a public institution. It's like the city council here. City council goes and meets with people all the time. You consult with people. You're open to ideas. Most other entities of government are. Montgomery College does not seem to be. They patently disregard the agreement of 2002. This council has passed 2 resolutions, which they have also ignored. As you heard, there was a letter from former Mayor Williams, which the college also ignored. And I think it's time for the city to get a little bit more assertive in dealings with the college. I have 2 things I'd like to ask you to think about. One is for elected officials yourselves to make contact with other elected officials at other levels of government, and particularly the county government and our legislative delegation to Annapolis, and work with them to develop mechanisms where the college is going to be more open and transparent and communicative with the neighbors, with the city, and with other levels of government, including the county planning department. The other thing I would like you to do is I would like you to ask the city attorney to take a look at that agreement and see if there's some legal pressures that could be brought against the college to enforce that agreement. It appears to me, as a non-attorney, that that's a pretty strong agreement, and the people who are found at fault there might even get to pay the lawyer costs, which is always great when Tacoma Park is concerned. So I appreciate that. Think about these questions when you're learning about this really, truly massive 10 to 15-year-old project that's being planned. Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll turn to council comments. Councilmember Schultz, is this an old light or?
Old light.
Okay. Any council comments this evening? Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank all the people who put together the Martin Luther King celebration this week. It was, I think, very well attended and very good presentation. And I certainly enjoyed myself and think other people did too. I also wanted to apologize. Last week I had raised a concern and asked staff to check into the sale of faux gras in Tacoma Park. And since then I've learned that this issue was brought to me by a troubled senior, and it appears that it was a false report. And I apologize to staff and also for to the co-op for the false report. Thank you.
Councilmember Mail?
Thank you. A couple of comments. One, I brought this up a couple times, but here we are. It's snowing outside. I'd really like us to actually have a vote and a decision on when to send postcards or some sort of communication to residents.
I'm sorry, it is going out in the next newsletter, and we have designs for bus shelter ads, and there'll be some information, copies of it emailed out to you, so you can also email it to others.
Fantastic. And if you could just share when they're ready.
Yeah.
No rush. The designs of the bus shelter, it'd just be nice to see them.
Absolutely.
The second issue, and the comments we had tonight reminded me of this. I fully support the city staff efforts and city council, my colleagues' efforts to work with county council. But just like we have a lobbyist in Annapolis to represent our interests, I think we should consider spending something like half the amount of money we spend at the state level, having capacity that's allocated toward keeping track of important issues in the county. These issues we're hearing about tonight are one example of that. Dealing with county government would allow us to better follow them. But there are countless others on schools, on budget, on tax duplication. And so I just mentioned that as something for my colleagues to consider in our next budget and for residents to consider. And last issue, I wanted to request that city staff provide an update to myself and council, and please feel free to bring county planning, zoning staff in on the status of zoning code violations at the significantly expanded house on Colby Avenue. It's, I think, the biggest house I've ever seen on a small lot in the city, and the county has issued a stop work order. I think it's the county on that property, but I'm not sure of what the appeals and resolution process will be, and I want to make sure that it doesn't just slip through the cracks. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Last week I wasn't here. I had the honor of representing the city at the Maryland Municipal League's annual reception to start the General Assembly's session in Annapolis. I was recently appointed to the Legislative Committee, so I will be spending at least Wednesdays in Annapolis. Maryland Municipal League has come out with two priorities, legislative priorities. One of them is maintaining the highway user revenue, and the other is protection of local program open space money. Today, the governor's budget was released, and we have some good news about the highway user revenue. The session is not over, so we hope the money stays in the budget. But the total amount of money is going to be close to $28 million will be going to the municipalities in Maryland. In the next day or two, we'll find out how much that is for Tacoma Park. So in the next couple weeks, we should find out whether or not we are able to protect the program open space monies. That's very important for us in Tacoma Park. We're going to use some of that money to build our future dog park. So many municipalities in Montgomery County use program open space, so I'm going to fight really hard to make sure it stays in this budget. And finally, I was recently appointed to the executive board for the Montgomery chapter of the Maryland Municipal League. So I want to thank my colleagues throughout the Montgomery County for considering me to serve on the board. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. I wanted to say a few words regarding Montgomery College, and I appreciate the fact that Lorraine Pearsall and Francis Phipps and Julie Schmidt and Paul Krastowski all came out today. It's not great weather out there, and to comment on that. To me, it's a process question. I've had the opportunity with the Provost, Brad Stewart, to tour the site, and I think the science building, the physical plant there does need to be improved upon. It's currently inadequate, but I think process-wise there has to be better consultation with the city. Lorraine talked about the agreement that was reached 2002, which still applies. That calls for better consultation. And I think it's tempting to say, well, a master plan is not something that's specific. It lays out a framework. Well, if that's true, why wouldn't you want to have a sense of how that could mesh with what people in the community wanted? So I did actually call the president of the college yesterday and let her know that I think it's a mistake on their part to not share information with us prior to the vote. And it does appear that the whole process was shortened up, telescoped into a shorter time frame than would normally be the case. We had a couple of meetings in the fall, and then the vote is scheduled on the 25th of the board, and it's only after that that we'll have an opportunity to see what's in the master plan. And so at that point, to the extent that there are concerns that the city has, it's almost beyond the point where we can really change that. Now, I anticipate, and I hope we will, after tonight, and once we see more when the board votes, have an opportunity to weigh in with the state on it. But I think process-wise, that's just not the way we should be proceeding. A separate matter, and I don't know, Suzanne, if you were planning to talk about this, but a few people have asked me, how is the snow ordinance going to be enforced? And maybe you'll cover that.
In just a minute.
Yeah, good. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, a couple things that I hadn't thought about commenting on, but I will now. In regard to Mr. Lovelace's question about the lawsuit against Washington Adventist Hospital, I want people to know that, I know very little about it, but to understand that the Angelos law firm, which is based in Baltimore, has made the owner of that law firm, the owner of it, the founder of it, Peter Angelos, an extraordinarily wealthy attorney, one of the wealthiest in this region, because he got famous and rich by filing claims on the issue of asbestos. So the law firm is notorious, and what they're simply trying to do here, they've been running ads soliciting possible people who feel like they had bad medicine applied to them at various hospitals in the state of Maryland to come to his law firm in order so that he can represent them and file suit and that sort of thing. It's something that's not unknown to the hospital. It's not new. It's been around for a while. Councilmember Siemens just a moment ago showed me an article in the Baltimore Sun papers in reference to it. But I think your point is your concern is well taken, and but I'm sure that the hospital is fully aware of it and understands what their risk parameters are. That's all I can say on the subject because I know very little about it. The other comment I wanted to make is with regard to Montgomery Community College. I would just second what Mr. Kovar has just said. My ward is on the complete opposite side of the city of Tacoma Park, so I'm not going to have as much of a role to play as Councilmember Kovar is going to have in all of this. But I would point out that over the last 3 to 4 years, the city has been working almost hand in glove with Washington Adventist Hospital. On a monthly basis, we've been meeting with the president and other officers of that institution with regard to the planning of their future, such as it could have gone, and we now know which direction it is going to go. But those meetings will be continuing. And it seems to me that we've got another great institution in our midst with Montgomery College. In fact, we've got 2 schools of higher education here, including Washington Adventist University. So we've got experience in dealing with these sorts of things. And the whole premise of these regular meetings is to prevent the kind of information that we've heard from our residents in Ward 1 tonight. And that is so that we are actually working with the college and trying to be of some use to the college, and the college is trying to make a little life easier for the city council and for the residents of this city to understand what the college's needs are, what its plans are, and all of that. I think something like that ought to be established. I mean, we can write memorandums of understanding, but obviously they're pieces of paper, and if one party wants to ignore an MOU or something, then it just remains a piece of paper. I'm disappointed that yet again, since I've been on the city council now for over 6 years, we're hearing another strident situation where the college has not really lived up to its promises to commute early and readily with the residents, and I don't see any reason for that. I mean, we're experienced people in this city. We can talk and we can help you. I mean, what I said to the hospital years ago that got this conversation going is that your success as an institution is really is the success of the city of Tacoma Park. We can't have failed institutions. We know these institutions need to grow in order to be competitive, and it just seems to me that we need to establish some kind of regular communication on an ongoing basis, so that these situations, which are really uncomfortable and I think unnecessary, keep arising here. There's no reason that residents in Ward 1 should be, who are people who are known to be very much aware of what is going on, why they cannot be part of this conversation on an ongoing basis. That's just a comment on my part. It's not policy, but I think it's something that we ought to be thinking about.
Thank you, Councilmember Schultz. Just a couple of things for me tonight. Mr. Lovelace, on the car charging station, I do have an email from our sustainability manager, and I apologize that I cannot find it this evening. But next meeting, we will have a better answer for you. I want to also let folks know the city manager will talk about the snow policy in a moment, given the storm that is heading our way. But I just wanted to let people know that the Snow Angels, which is a program between the difference makers at Tacoma Park Middle School and the city of Tacoma Park, they have signed up over, I believe 80 households. They have matched 80 households who have signed up for this with people who will help shovel their snow when conditions are available. There are 5 houses left. If you would like to sign up, there are only 5 houses left. You can reach Mr. Gehring at the Tacoma Park Middle School. I would also like to thank Councilmember Smith for spending his time in Annapolis and making sure we're well represented there, and he brings back information to us. And finally, I want to add my thanks to Councilmember Siemens for a wonderful Martin Luther King Day celebration. A lot of work went into it. The Tacoma United for an Engaged Community Organizing Committee. I would like to take the time and just call out the people who put this together: Jessica Kelser, Bruce Baker, Shawanda Oliver, Jaquette Frazier, Gladys Harvey, Terry and Joyce Siemens, Jay Keller, Howard Cohen, Jen Wofford, and Terrell North. And the Tacoma Foundation also helped. They were joined by Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, students at Piney Branch Elementary School and Tacoma Park Elementary School. And it was a wonderful event, and I just want to thank everyone for putting that together. In addition, we had 3 sites where volunteers went out on a very cold day.
Really cold.
It was really cold. I don't think it went over 30. But we had 3 sites where we had over 80 adults, over 50 young people who picked up trash, cut kudzu, and it was really a very good day. So I just want to thank everyone for organizing that. City Manager?
Thanks. Yeah, I participated in the Long Branch one, and I dressed warmly, but oh my goodness. Wanted to go over a couple things, and weather is an issue. For people who've been outside, they know that weather is an issue at the moment. We have called our public works trucks back in to treat the streets because it's dangerous out there. There are some facilities, city facilities, that are closing early this evening, and some of the classes have been, some of the basketball practices and stuff have been canceled for the evening because of the bad weather tonight. However, most of our focus has been on this weekend, where the predictions for a blizzard seem to stick to the same numbers, which are really quite substantive. They're talking anywhere from 12 to 20 inches in this area, and it could go higher. More concerning to me, frankly, is the fact that the snow, some of it will be heavy, and the winds will be very strong. From Friday night through Saturday night, they're saying the winds will be 35 miles per hour with higher gusts. We've not had a windstorm for quite some time. I anticipate limbs coming down, trees coming down, and power outages. And so I think it's going to be a mess. We are preparing for all of that. I think that we're likely to be closed Saturday and Sunday for our city facilities. We'll let people know. We may close midday on Friday. I'm not sure exactly what the federal government is going to do. In the mornings, on weekdays, the city facilities follow the federal government announcement. So if the federal government closes, we close. If it's a delay, we're delayed. Later in the day, if we feel we need to close, that is a city manager call. So we'll be letting people know. We have many ways to get the word out. And of course, the council members will be kept apprised of that. We will begin 12-hour shifts with our public works trucks, likely midday Friday, and that'll continue as long as it's needed. We're even making arrangements to house police department, dispatch officers, and public works staff overnight so that they are able to be here when it's time for their shift, and making sure that we are fully staffed for the emergency services that we need. One of the things that is one of those frustrating things, we have been working on this design for Be a Good Neighbor, but it advertises the times that you should shovel by. And so if it snows overnight, you're to shovel by noon to clear the walks. And if the snow comes down during the daytime, you're to shovel by 9. In a staff meeting today of our various folks involved in emergency services, it was determined that if the predictions are correct, it is not going to be appropriate to shovel during the blizzard. And so we will not be enforcing you have to clear your walk by noon on Saturday or something like that. We do want people to work at it. We do want people to be good neighbors and help each other out. The reason for shoveling is public safety. If somebody needs to get somewhere, you need to be able to get there, so we appreciate that. We also know that it's going to be really difficult this weekend. We will not be doing code enforcement and inspections of the sidewalks until Monday, so that gives the people the weekend to work on these things. If for some reason the predictions are completely off and it's more of a routine kind of storm, we'll let people know, and we will encourage the compliance to the times that's been set by the council. Because it is likely to be a very difficult storm, we were happy about the snow angels. It's going to take them a while to do this work too, so we recognize that. We do need to make sure that people are good neighbors, look in on others on their block that may be more vulnerable, and really try to help each other out. We want people to be prepared, have the kind of emergency supplies that you always need. Information is on the website about what's required for that. The city website, City TV will have a crawl. We'll have information out via the e-news, the Tacoma Park Alert System. I'll put out a blog and give updates over the course of the event. Facility closings are listed on the WTOP news and website, as well as those other sources. If trees or wires come down, people are encouraged to call the police department at their number, which is the 301-270-1100 number. So don't call Public Works because a tree came down. Please call the police department. And similarly, if there's some other kind of unsafe situation like that, call the police department. If there's a medical problem or a fire, that's a 911 call, and please follow that option. I think that we've had lots of experience with big storms, so our crews really are great and know what to do. But we always have new residents, and they need to know how we respond, how to get in touch. They'll contact you. If you know of an issue, please contact me or the police department or whomever. and we'll be responsive and try to address the various issues. So that's, I don't know if there's any specific questions about the storm prep that I need to answer.
Just one question. So if someone's kind of stuck and not in an emergency situation, but can't get out and needs to at some point, what's the best thing for them to do?
Well, it depends. If they need to get to a shelter, if they feel they need, if there's shelters are set up by Montgomery County and they need to get to a shelter, they can call the police department, and we'll coordinate ways to get them there. I think, we try to help each other out, so it might be a neighbor that they can call and make yourself, have neighbors make themselves available for that. We do try to help things out. So if there's something you want to contact me or the police department about, please do so.
Do you want to mention anything about Friday's trash pickup, recycling?
Our plan is to do complete regular pickup of Friday's trash and recycling. So we will have the crews in to do that. The other crews aren't coming in, and they'll wait. The right-of-way crews will come in late to start the snow plowing shifts.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
My point of reference, of course, is the February 2010 snowstorm that the President of the United States coined Snowmageddon aptly. That time, the city had had contracts with outside plowing companies, which came in with very large pieces of equipment. And is that going to happen, or do we have that contingency?
We always have that as an option.
Always have that as an option. Okay. The other thing is that communications are better nowadays. If the wires are down, we have cell phones and that sort of thing.
Right.
But I do remember feeling a little bit lost. Of course, had been on the city council 3 months at that time. I was having a hard time even finding my way to the community center. But to whatever extent that it's possible to keep us council members fully informed of the decisions that are being made here by you, by the police, by the Department of Public Works, so that can help each of us, certainly myself, figure out ways that what I can do to be of assistance, not only to my constituents, but to you guys. That would be greatly helpful.
I try to be as communicative as I can.
Yeah.
I also had just a couple other items following up from the meeting of January 13th. A resident noted that the Martin Luther King stone at the base of a tree in front of the library was askew. I think it's been corrected, but if not, the Public Works Department will be fixing that very shortly. And I also just wanted to note that Councilmember Schultz mentioned concerns about the lighting in the community center. We are going to try to do some adjustments with some of the existing lights, but I think a more full discussion of lighting in this area will have to come at a later time in a more comprehensive way.
Yep, I agree.
Thanks.
One follow-up. These summaries that you provide every week are extremely helpful, and I'm open to it if the city manager thinks otherwise, but I think these would be helpful to put with the agenda packets on every week.
Are we doing that?
In fact, I think we were talking just this afternoon about making a separate column for them.
Okay.
So
great.
people can know them.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
I'm glad to hear that.
Terrific. Okay. Moving on to our work sessions this evening. The first one will be looking at our comprehensive annual financial report and audit. Does the city manager want to say anything on that?
No, I'm pleased to have our auditors here to brief the council on the details of our comprehensive annual financial report, which we call the CAFR, and our audit. I will say that the staff of the auditing firm has been very helpful, and I think appreciate their insight and their questions. I also want to note that in the audience is Susan Chung, our acting finance director, and her work on the CAFR was really remarkable, and I appreciate her assistance. Matt, Dan?
Okay. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Nice to see everyone. So we have 3 documents we're going to go over this evening. We have a presentation, and then we have a management letter, and then a letter called communication with those charged with governance. So the first item is the presentation, and Matt's going to flip as I go through it. If you look at the agenda, talks about the different areas that we're going to go into. So on page 3, this is our auditor's opinion, and it indicates that we've audited the city as of June 30th, 2015. Talks about management's responsibility for the preparation of the financial statements, and it talks about the auditor's responsibility. And we believe the audit evidence that we've obtained is sufficient and appropriate to render an opinion. Moving on to page 4, this has the opinion, and in our opinion, the financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2015 are fairly presented.
Just to interrupt you, just to let you know, our pages don't match with
Okay.
yours. But that's okay. We can follow along, but
All right.
I just wanted to let you know that.
There's always something.
Yeah.
You know, prepare for this.
Best laid plans.
Okay. And then in the auditor's opinion, it has a couple other areas. Change in accounting principle, you adopted GASB 68 and 71. And then it talks about the required supplementary information with respect to the MD&A. And then the other information, that talks about what we performed with respect to the budgetary schedules, et cetera. And then because your audit is conducted in accordance with government auditing standards, we issued a report on internal control over financial reporting and in internal control over compliance. And that is your next slide. So there's 2 areas in the report on internal control over financial reporting, and then there's a section on compliance and other matters. And in the internal control over financial reporting, you didn't have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. And then under compliance and other matters, the results of our test disclose no instances of noncompliance. Okay, moving on. Within your CAFR document, we just highlighted the different sections within the CAFR. And then what I'm going to have Matt do is go through the slides, and it has a comparison for the last 3 fiscal years. Matt?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Stangram. I'm the audit manager that on the fiscal year 15 financial statement audit for the city. As Dan mentioned, I'm just going to go through a few of the more key highlights of the town's financial statements. The first slide is I guess it shows the total net position of the city for the last 3 years. And as you can see, it dropped by about $12.7 million between 2014 and 15, which really is attributable to the adoption of GASB 68 and the recognition of the town's net pension liability on the financial statements in 2015.
Could you just take?
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's 2 things. One is when we look in the CAFR, it does restate the difference for 2014 and 2015, so you don't see the same disparity. But maybe you could talk just a little bit more about what that restatement is and why it looks like this.
Sure.
What the GASB standard is.
Yeah, sure. Dan, jump in if.
And that's on the last page of the presentation, but that's fine. Why don't you just flip to the last page?
Yeah. So the last slide indicates the impact of adopting GASB 68 on the town's financial statements, and it's really, I guess, the Government Accounting Standards Board is their main goal is transparency within the municipalities, and recognizing that net pension liability is their way of increasing that transparency to the users of the financial statements and those that are making decisions based on the financial records of the city.
Right. So what it's trying to do is, before you had notes that talked about the information, but now what it's saying is, hey, you have to put it on your books. You have to actually get it on the balance sheet so that everyone can see how much that number is. And that's what this is.
And that goes for jurisdictions across the country, is that correct?
Absolutely. And no one is happy about it. Even though they knew it was in their notes, they still don't like to see the number. But it's basically what it is in a nutshell. All right.
Sure. Okay. So the next chart here is, I guess, the primary government revenue for the city for the last 3 years. which you can see it increased by about $1.2 million. The next slide further breaks that down into the financial statement line items and the more significant categories of revenue of the city. The first is property taxes, which increased by about $100,000, so pretty consistent with the previous year, and I think that's mainly attributable to no significant changes in the assessed value of property and no significant changes in the tax rate. Grants and contributions increased by about $300,000, which is mainly attributable to state aid and county funding for police services. The next category is charges for services, which also remained pretty consistent, increased by about $100,000 between 14 and 15. And the main reason for that was the speed camera revenue. Speed camera fines increased between 14 and 15. The intergovernmental revenue increased by about $500,000. That's mainly attributable to income tax increase and also to highway user revenue increase. This chart is an indication of the total primary government expenses for the last 3 years. So you can see between fiscal year 14 and fiscal year 15, they increased by about $1.3 million. And a further breakdown of those expenses by function is on the next chart. So the general government expenses increased by about $750,000, which was mainly attributable to some cable equipment expense that was incurred in fiscal year 2015. Public safety expense actually decreased by about $130,000, which is the main result of, in the previous year, fiscal year 14, I believe, certain police equipment, radios, computers was purchased, where those expenditures were not made in fiscal year 15. Public works expense increased by about $400,000, mainly due to street repairs within the city. The housing and community development expense increased by about $110,000, mainly attributable to the city's residential exterior home repair program. The recreation and culture increased by about $230,000 between 14 and 15, and that was mainly attributable to additional personnel costs due to increase in rec programs and youth camps within the city. This next slide offers a benchmark as it relates to the city's unassigned fund balance, general fund unassigned fund balance, as recommended by the GFOA. So the GFOA recommends at a minimum that general purpose governments, regardless of size, maintain unassigned fund balance in their general fund of no less than 2 months. And the next slide, as you can see, the city is very consistent with that GFOA best practice recommendation, where you're about 2.3 months of unassigned fund balance.
Okay, so the next item is the SAS 114, communication with those charged with governance. So there's a separate report on that. And it talks about under accounting estimates. There's a couple estimates, and then it also talks about the fact that you implemented GASB 68 and 71, which is mentioned in our audit opinion. And then under your estimates, it talks about some of the key ones. And one is the allowance for doubtful accounts. And then there's 3 other, of course, is the depreciation, the net pension liability, and then the accumulated vacation leave. And we looked at the key factors and assumptions within all those estimates and determined those to be reasonable. And also included in your net pension liability, because it is an estimate of that amount due, there's also sensitivity to the assumptions used. So that's why it wants to refer you to that particular note and look at the fluctuation with respect to that. And then the rest of the items talks about that there was no difficulties encountered in performing the audit. There weren't any corrected audit adjustments that we noted during the course of the audit. There were no disagreements with management. And if you go to page 3, under the management representations, they were consistent with the previous year. There were no other management consultations with other accountants regarding any accounting issue. And there weren't any other matters to discuss other than the management letter. And the other thing I wanted to point out too as well, within your comprehensive annual financial report on page 7, you guys received the award from the GFOA for their Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. You received that award again, and that relates to your previous year audit. And what happens is your report gets submitted to the GFOA, they review it, and then they come back with a few comments, and then hopefully you'll get the award again as well. But I wanted to point that out. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and go through the couple of the management letter comments. And just so you know, in the management letter comments, they're all IT related. And you can see the management's response in there. And most of these comments are on there because I think in September 25th of 2014, they implemented it. But there is that window because your audit is for the whole year.
And can I just make sure my colleagues, these were the documents that were at our places when we got
That's
here.
right.
They're not in
That's
what was
right.
in your mailbox.
They were just sent to us.
I just want to make sure everybody has them.
Sure. So as Dave mentioned, they're all IT related, and as we go through, you'll see most of management's responses are that they've been implemented or they're in progress of being implemented. So we haven't audited or reviewed management's response as of fiscal year at the end of fiscal year 15, but in this upcoming year, those responses will be reviewed for implementation. So going through the list, number one, some network vulnerabilities, and this mainly relates to some of the servers and systems and software was a little bit outdated, but management's response has indicated that they're in the process of or have implemented either patches or updates to the software to bring it up to date, up to speed with the most current versions. Number two relates to the data center. One observation we had made was related to the fire protection system. The pipes were wet pipes, which in the event that they were activated would damage the servers. And management indicated that there's a contract in place to update those wet pipes. Network passwords was also another observation relating to the length and number of characters needed for those passwords. But management has also indicated that they've updated the password requirement to be with what is standard within the IT industry. And then audit logging, also another observation that was made related to tracking the access to the financial system, who's in and out, and the time of day that it's been accessed. And management has also indicated that they've turned on the audit logging system into the financial system to monitor and track who's been accessing that system. So those are the four key observations that we had made.
Right, and as Matt mentioned, next year we'll go in and look at that and make sure those responses have actually been done. And if not, then it'll be on the letter again as well. Okay, so that concludes our presentation. As your independent auditor, feel free to ask us any questions now, or if you think about something later, feel free to contact us directly or go through the city manager. We'll be more than happy to answer all your questions.
Are we going to ask?
Yeah. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We really appreciate you guys coming. It's always nice to hear good news.
Yes.
The question has to do with the pension liability. Have you guys talked to, whether it's any other municipalities or governments that had to issue bonds? And with this new pension liability, has there been an increase in the interest that the bond issuer would have to pay?
Not specifically relating to that. I mean, a lot of time was spent on, the implementation of 68, adding all the additional disclosures. For the most part, no one was surprised at, the fact that they had to record the liability, and, they felt as though the disclosures were pretty good because it talks about, the different assumptions used. And a lot of talk was about just getting comfortable with the fact that it's on their balance sheet.
Right.
But a lot of people are really just digesting the information and determining, okay, what does this mean? Do we have to pay this right now? And the answer is no, because it's an estimate of the pension liability. That's a projection of, all the people that are here and, the actuary. They know how to talk about that. So.
Right.
So that's really the conversations.
Okay.
But that's a good question.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Mann?
Thank you. I apologize to my colleagues. I have a bunch of questions. First, I'd note that GASB 68, I think, was part of the Dodd-Frank legislation. I think we have a council member who used to work for Congressman Frank. So we could pass some blame along over there. We made the assumption, and maybe this is more appropriate for the pension conversation later on, but a 7.5% rate of return. Is that our adjustment last year? Did we meet that target? Or I could just cover it in the next? No. Okay. The second, and I don't know if you guys ever deal with this, but in terms of the city's holdings, so how our pension or other assets are invested, have you dealt with cities or other budgets or audits where there's been some effort to try to track down the origin of those holdings, for example, for cities trying to divest in fossil fuel ownership or previously in South Africa's apartheid government or anything like that, where government is trying to essentially track down where their investments are, and obviously the part I'm asking you about is how that might reflect into the audit process.
That's a great question. So there's a new GASB that's going to be coming out. It's GASB 72, and it talks specifically about fair value of investments. So whatever investments you have on the balance sheet, you have to disclose what category they're in, and it's a category 1, 2, or 3. And if you have investments that are in government securities, that's usually a level 1. And I'm just going to jump to a level 3. If you invest in partnerships that don't have a readily tradable type of entity, those are considered level 3, and you have to add more disclosures about that and talk about what that is. So if you're investing in a hedge fund or something other than your traditional government securities, because you want to hedge some of your investments, and obviously if you invest in things that are a little more risky, you might have a chance for a higher rate of return. But that's what GASB 72 does. It's going to show you what the city has invested in, whatever particular investment, and it's going to get into some of the details there.
And that's coming when?
That'll be next year.
Next year.
Yeah.
To follow up on Councilmember Smith's question, hypothetically, could we borrow $10 million, use the $10 million to pay down our pension liability, or I should say to invest in pension, and earn a 7.5 rate or 6.5 rate or whatever % of return on that?
I can't really comment on that. I mean, that's something to talk to your
Okay.
financial advisor and your pension.
Would it significantly affect our audit if we had borrowing for that purpose that changed the pension liability?
Well, you would add debt, and whether or not you get rated and what your rating is. I mean, that would certainly, they would take into account that.
We'd add debt, but we'd also lower debt in some form, or
yeah, I can't.
You guys
I can't
don't have
speculate
a
on
specific
that.
opinion on that.
So,
on page 13 of the big book that we have, you report that we have a unassigned general fund balance of $4.3 million, which is 19% of general fund expenditures. And I note in previous conversations we've talked about cities that have a policy of 15%. But I'm just curious, in your experience of dealing with municipal and small municipal governments, what sort of variation you see in unassigned fund balance? And I don't just mean sort of one-off, like might be exceptionally high or exceptionally low, but sort of consistent trends in municipal fund balances.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, I've seen it as low as, Matt had a slide in there that talked about the number of months, and you're within the acceptable range. I've also seen, and what was it, 2.3? Yeah, right, 2.3. I've also seen it as high as 12.
And just noting for my colleagues that if we instead set 15 instead of 19%, that would free up $173,000 for investment in youth or better policing or any number of other priorities.
Can I just stop there? Because I want to make sure I'm comparing in my head apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Because the slide you showed us had the fund balance and the recommended is no less than 2 months, and you said we were at 2.3.
Correct.
And explain now what Councilmember Mail is pointing to and the difference.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is, since you were over the recommended amount, I think what he's trying to say is, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is, that 0.3 represents $175,000 that you could spend. It would reduce the fund balance, and you would still be within the acceptable level. In contrast to that, I said, I've seen as high as 12 months, so that would mean it would go the other way. And it's all,
that to make sure
it's all, you guys make that decision.
Page 17, there's deferred outflows and deferred inflows of resources reported, but there weren't any last year. Is that just a new difference again, GASB 68?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Sorry, just bear with me, just a couple more pages here. What does the table on page 65 mean, which is a series of retirement plan, target allocations, and expected real rate of returns?
Right, so that is, if you look at it, that's directly from the plan itself, and it just talks about the allocation that you guys have and the, expected rate of return within that particular allocation.
Okay. So the second column reflects our targets within the plan, so we could assume that, for example, 35% on average of our funds are in public equities?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar?
Yes, and this relates to the questions that have just been asked by my colleagues. So there's a decline in the total net position, and I think you said that decline wouldn't necessarily have any clear impact on the ability of the city to borrow money or to increase the interest that we would pay. Is that right?
I don't know if I said that directly, but
okay,
everybody is aware of GASB 68. The sophisticated folks out there, the lenders, the rating agencies, they've seen within the notes, what your pension looked like, and they were all aware of this. So I can't, I can't speak on behalf of a rating agency,
right,
obviously, but they're aware that you were going to have this liability recorded. So,
but I guess the question is, it seems like it would be relevant to know how we compared with other. Are we great Gatsbys, for example, or not that good? Because that would
very clever. I'm going to use that on
that would determine maybe how lenders or bonders would look at us, right? So, do you have a sense how that decline and how that number and what we ended up with sort of compares to other people? Is there a way to do that?
Well, it's the financial statements are all public information, and now everyone has issued their financials. So you could certainly, and if you want, we could help put together an analysis for the different, counties and/or cities within the area, or even a little bit outside, and make a comparison and provide you guys more data.
Just going back to the pages, I did not bring the CAFR in front of me, but we do show that our net position, as restated, went up slightly, so we're a little better than the previous year. So, it looks down because if you compare to how we had it last year with the change in how the pension is shown. But in general, we do a little bit better.
If we had used the same
that's right
version last year, too.
That's right.
Okay.
But I think also the information about comparing is something that we can get through some of the Maryland Municipal League and some of the other services that we have available.
Okay.
Councilmember Schultz?
No questions, but 2 comments. It would seem to me that being that before this particular GASB ruling, these were all footnoted. as opposed to being on the actual balance sheet, these pension liabilities, so that any bond rating agency would, if they were rating our city, hypothetically, would have seen the liability in any case. So it's not really a new liability at all. It doesn't really change our financial condition. It just changes the appearance of the financial condition. And most of these people, as you were pointing out, are sophisticated enough to take all of that into account. The second comment is that my understanding is that we don't get rated. We're too small of a city.
Right.
Nobody bothers
We've
to
not
rate us because
done
we
that
don't
for us.
go out and borrow that much, and most of the borrowing is done through the aegis of the state of Maryland.
Any other questions? Councilmember Mail?
Yeah, I'll just note, and I've mentioned this before, so I won't go on at length, but the table on page 38 looks at our original budget, the budget the council approved, the final budget that we adopted, and then actual expenses, and describes the variance. And I just point out that the difference is $2.3 million, so roughly 10% of what we expected to fund in the budget was not funded. We didn't do that work yet. The city manager wisely points out that some of the work will still happen. It just hasn't happened in that budget year. But I just point that out. I always like to point that out because that gap in what we spend represents a gap in services that we don't provide that year. If we, for example, if we achieved 100% of what we plan to do in our budget, then in theory, we would set us up to do 100% the next year. In other words, we as a city would be moving forward and providing services 10% faster. And so to me, that gap is consistent. It's been in some years up to $5.5 million, but the last 4 or 5 years, it's been consistently 2.3, whatever, 10% of the city budget. That consistently represents, stuff that we're not getting done and that is slowing us down as a city. So I especially point that out to my colleagues just because it represents the level of our ambition and not quite getting there, and anything we can do to help make sure that we actually achieve what we're setting out to do when we put a budget forth means that we're providing those services to our residents. Thank you.
Any other comments? Questions? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay,
Stay
thank you.
home. All right, now we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is the pension.
We're pleased to have Tom Lohman here. Comes to our pension board meeting.
Good evening. Yes, I'm Tom Lohman. I'm the actuary for the pension plan. So I just have a handful of slides to sort of take you through. You can ask me any questions you want. I'll make sure I talk about pension obligation bonds, as that question was asked, when we get to the GASB section. Some of this is sort of things I've said in the prior years, just to give people the same background, but then I'll jump ahead to what's new and what's coming in the future. So just as the background, again, your police employees used to be in the state plan given the same benefits as all your other employees. And many years ago, 14 years ago, there was a decision made that the police should be like other police and they should have a special benefit formula. Earlier retirement ages, better formulas, and higher employee contributions. The state did offer a plan called LEOPS for law enforcement. You decided not to go into LEOPS. You decided to set up your own plan. So that's a little bit of background, those first 3 bullets. On the next slide, I'll talk about what the actual provisions of the plan are. A couple other things in background is, was mentioned before, that our investment return assumption is 7.5%. It had been 8%. 3 years ago, we changed it. And in some ways, this year, we lowered it again. While it's still 7.5%, that was also supposed to be returned to cover all the expenses of the plan. We actually now charge you expenses as part of your normal costs. So effectively, we have, while not lowering it on paper, we have really lowered the threshold by about 20 basis points or so. So your 7.5% assumption is pretty much in line with other plans. It's probably a little bit below the median, but I think they all need to come down a little bit. We're probably heading down towards 7, but it's very painful to change. It may be several years before we get there. But again, right now we're at 7.5, and I'm still comfortable with 7.5. The state's higher than 7.5. But it's one of those things we do think about a lot every year about what should that discount rate be. As far as the benefits you provide your employees, for your police officers, they can retire 25 years of service at 50% of pay. That means 2% of pay per year of service. For a public safety plan, it's not a particularly generous plan. It's sort of it's nice to have this benefit than a general employee's benefit where you got to wait till you're 65. But again, for a public safety lease, not particularly generous. There is an early retirement provision where they can retire with reduced benefits, but for the most part, I would expect most of your employees would wait to 25 years unless they were sort of a late career hire. The retirees do get a COLA. I mean, their pensions go up every year by the CPI with a cap of 3%. There are also disability benefits provided, and a fair number of people use disability benefits. I mean, most are what we call service retirements, but if they are disabled and they can't do their job, there are special disability benefits. They've been pared back over time, so it's a little harder to get the full disability benefit compared to when the plan first started. And I mentioned before the employees contribute to the plan. They contribute 7% of pay. So those are quickly the benefits. So our main job every year is to determine the city's contribution. We know the employees pay 7%. Well, what does the city pay? Well, this is the defined benefit plan. That means the benefits are defined, the contribution is not. So every year we adjust the benefits depending on how the markets have done and how the experience has been. So, and we usually show the cost as a percent of payroll, and then in December of every year, we look back to the prior year's valuation, we put in that contribution. So payroll goes up, more dollars, but what we're trying to do is make that contribution as a percent of payroll level. So sort of good news this year. It went down this year. It went down from about 42 to 41.6% of payroll. Still a high number. 40% of payroll is a lot. And we'll talk more about two components to that. But at least it didn't go out. Didn't go up. The main reason it went down was you increased your payroll. We have more employees. We'll see those counts later. And most of your cost is a legacy cost. When the plan was put in, they came out of the state, made bigger promises. The liabilities are bigger. In the early years, we had a lot of disabilities. So the plan has an unfunded liability, which gets into this balance sheet number for GASB 68, and most of your payments are to pay off the unfunded liability. But when you have a higher payroll, there's more payroll to spread that cost over. So we need to get these dollars in, but as a percent of payroll, it will simply look smaller. This is all tiny print, but this is a key page of our valuation report. At the top, it shows you the years 2014, 2015. Our key assumption is the return assumption. There's lots of other assumptions, but this is by far the biggest assumption, which is why we talk about it more than the other assumptions. It's 7.5 in both those years. And it's, again, not a particularly big plan. You only had 37 active employees the year before, but now you have 41. And then there's the payroll going from $2.5 to $2.8 million. Wow. And that's why the cost of percent of payroll has dropped, primarily because payroll went up. There are some numbers about liabilities down below. We broke it down between the active employees, the retired, the disabled. You see a lot of disabled liabilities, and a small group of former employees, terminated vested employees. But it's about $21 million in liabilities on this basis. The value of assets is about $11 million. The unfunded liability was about $10 million. So the unfunded is a little less than it was the year before, but still a big number. So we're paying that off over about 20 years. The payment is $679,000. As a percent of payroll, that's almost 24% of payroll. So I said before, most of your payments, most of that 42% of pay is to pay off this unfunded liability of about $10 million. There's a normal cost, about $500,000. This is the benefits being earned for the current year. So if you were 100% funded, this is all I would be asking you for is $500,000. But unfortunately, you're not, so you need about $1.1 million, and we express it as a percent of payroll, and that's what goes into your budget. So these are the funding numbers, what we're looking for in terms of cash for fiscal year 17. Contribution will usually made in about December of 16. Okay. But when we get away from funding and cash cost, then we move into this GASB world. So it was already introduced very well in the prior session. So here we've been doing these numbers for now 2 years for disclosure purposes. GASB 67 is planned disclosure. So last year and this year we've disclosed liabilities for accounting purposes. But this year is the first time where GASB 68 applies. And GASB 68 is what puts it on the balance sheet. it's what defines pension expense. And up until now, your expense was whatever your cash contribution was. It no longer is. So your cash contribution may be $1.1 million, your county expense we done totally different. Most people don't really focus on the county expense as much as the balance sheet liability, but GASB 68 defines both numbers, annual expense and a balance sheet liability. So I'll talk a little bit about pension obligation bonds when I get to the end of this page. But basically, you are still measuring even your accounting expense at the 7.5% interest rate. We expect that you're on a course to fully fund these obligations, but it will take many years to do that. The main part of your balance sheet liability is this thing called the city net pension liability of $9.64 million. And I'll talk about the $13 million I saw on a slide in a second too, which is basically the liabilities measured on accounting purposes, which is this $20.95 million, minus the market value of assets, which is not the same basis we use for funding, but in this case it's not too different. That's $11.3 million. So basically the unfunded liability is the difference. Now I think I saw a number up there of $13 million for your city's net pension liability. I'm assuming that includes your general employees, which are in the state plan, where you can allocate and share those. So I'm guessing that's about $3 or $4 million. So this 9 plus that 3 or 4 equals whatever. If I could put a little plug in about the quality of that state number, $3 or $4 million. I think they charge you about $1 million too much. I think they charge you a share of the state teachers' money, unfunded liability, and the state employees' unfunded liability. The Maryland Municipal League and MACO wrote letters, but this isn't.
We did complain about that.
Yeah, but in any case, it's only $1 million out of the $13 million. You still get a number out there, and the bulk of that is indeed the police plan. If you ask the question, and I'll be curious to see the results as well. How does this, in a relative sense, compare to the other cities around the state? My guess is it's going to be a little higher because not everybody has the sort of same police unfunded liability that you have. I think your $3 or $4 million from the state share, everybody's going to have that because a lot of the smaller jurisdictions are there. A few of the plans that aren't in the state are not as well funded, but many of them are generally better funded than your police plan. There are some other things beside the unfunded liability or this net pension liability, this deferred inflows and outflows. So your total balance sheet liability might be about 10.45. And I mentioned before your annual accounting expense is $970,000, which sort of isn't too far from the $1.1 million in cash contribution we want, but they are different numbers. So now you have three numbers. You have how much cash I want you to please find for your budget to put in the pension fund, most of which pays for the unfunded liability or legacy cost. You have a balance sheet number, which is mostly your unfunded liability based on the market value of assets and some deferred inflows and outflows. And you have an accounting expense, which will be similar to your cash expense, but not identical. So you asked a question about pension obligation bonds. So I can send you to the GFOA website, and they have best practices, and they have a write-up about pension obligation bonds. And basically, it's just all the considerations to consider. What should you do it or should you not do it? I'm not giving investment advice, but I'm not a big fan of pension obligation bonds. You're sort of swapping a soft liability here for a hard liability there. But for the most part, in my mind, it's all a wash. You got to pay the debt somewhere. And if I were a plan participant, I'd say yes, please, because I just care to make sure my plan's well funded. But on balance, as a taxpayer, you've got the liability one place or the other. So for the most part, it's just sort of a wash. And don't think that this is a issue of arbitrage. This is not. This is leveraging. If you were to do a pension obligation bond, you were hoping to make 7.5. There's no promise. So if you want to put it into the pension fund as the plan actuary and not a taxpayer, I am in Montgomery County, but not in Tacoma Park. I'm happy to take money from whatever source you can put into the pension plan. But for the most part, I'm not a big fan of pension obligation bonds. Not that I'm that against them, but that's really not really an actuarial comment. That's really something for you to decide with your investment people. But I think the main comment I heard before that I would agree with, you're just swapping one debt for another, and they're different types of debt. And how it affects your borrowing ability is definitely beyond my skill set. So my last slide, and we can come back to any of these that you want to, is I always like when I come in every year to talk about what's ahead, what do I see. So the first thing is we're seeing more conservative assumptions being adopted around the country. Like I said, we used to have 8%. 3 years ago, we went to 7.5%. I'm trying to get mine down even below that if I can. It's just very painful because when you lower the assumption and the cash contribution goes up and the balance sheet number goes up, everything goes up. But at some point, we might need to do that. But we do it slowly. But again, when we look at surveys, what I'm seeing out there is people are gradually lowering the rates. The number of plans with 8% assumptions gets smaller and smaller every year. The median rate, the last survey I saw was 7.75. I bet you if I did a survey today, it might very well be 7.5. I have plenty that are below 7.5, but none below 7, I don't think. The other things that are going on is a lot of discussion about good funding. You're paying off your unfunded liability over roughly 20 years. There are some people who aren't paying it off at all. Again, states, New Jersey, Illinois, others, they have big funding problems. And then they start pushing their actuary and extending their amortization period. So there's been a big discussion about GASB requires you to show your actually determined contribution if you determine one, which we do here, based on a 20-year amortization roughly, or 22 for some things. But the question is, well, what is a reasonable actually determined contribution? So the Actual Standards Board is actually going to define parameters for us. They've never done that before. So people are focused on good governance and good standards for what is good funding. There's also been a lot of debate about more disclosure. These plans have risk. I mean, next year's valuation isn't going to look very nice, is my guess, unless the market comes back. The costs will probably go up next year, and they want to do more to disclose risk. The problem is, well, how do we do more to disclose risk? Well, we're going to try. We're going to come up with new rules, new standards about how to make sure you understand risk. And one of the things they want us to do that I'm not real thrilled about is while it's not to be used for funding or accounting, they want us to measure these liabilities, these $20 million of liabilities, not based on 7.5%, but on a bond rate, maybe 3%. Well, it'll be a lot larger. So there's a lot of push to require disclosure of that number, which will scare people. And it isn't used for funding. It isn't used for accounting. It would roughly approximate what it might take to buy annuities, to wrap the plan up if that's what you're going to do. So again, this slide is about what's changing in the future. I'm simply saying these are things that will probably happen in the next couple of years. And finally, benefit design changes in litigation. And you would think in a market like this, when people are worried about GASB 68 putting something on your balance sheet, there was an article in one of the big papers the last couple of days about that, people reacting to it, particularly people in the state plans where they really had no idea what their share was. You've always known what your share was for the police plan. Until this year, you had no idea what it was for your general employees, whether it was $3 million or $10 million. You just didn't know. You would think that maybe this is like benefit cuts, but I'm doing as many studies to improve benefits as I am to cut benefits. But in any case, there is also a lot of discussion in that. And in some places where they're really strapped, they cut benefits and below what's even legally permissible, and they end up in court because maybe someone thinks it is permissible and someone doesn't think it's permissible. So one of my jobs these days is expert witness in litigation on different sides of different issues. So this is about what's changing out there. I support the idea of adopting more conservative assumptions, but gradually, no big shocks. Changes in actuarial standards will occur. Disclosure requirements will improve over time or expand over time. But it's still difficult to communicate some very complex issues. And again, benefit changes are always being discussed. So with that, I think I am done and ready for questions.
Terrific. Councilmember Schultz.
Thank you. It's interesting. I've been listening to this each year, and I glean a little bit more from year to year. Is your assignment require you or put you in a position of recommending what our valuation discount rate should be?
Yes, I recommend the board or the city council, somebody decides, and usually they adopt my recommendation. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. I mean, are you recommending that it stay at the current rate of 7.5%? Because I remember for about 3 or 4 years ago, you had recommended it be decreased.
Right. Again, we haven't met to talk about 7/1/16. We're still several months away. Mm-hmm. I know more and more of my clients, what we're deciding to do is even a 0.25% changes so much, we're actually start taking it in smaller increments. So
like an eighth?
5 basis points. So instead of 7.5, 7.45, 7.4, 7.
I see.
Just to do things gradually. But I'm not ready to commit today. I don't think they want me to commit today. We'll have that discussion with the pension committee.
Fine, right. I guess the other question I have is when we talk to try to help people wrap their mind around some of these terminologies. The unfunded liability basically is a hypothetical obligation we would have if 100% of our police force retired at the same time or became disabled and had to and we had to honor all of those obligations concurrently. Is that what the how far off am I being interpreting that?
Well, we have retirement rates at different ages, but assume the plan had 2 people in it. One was just hired and one is 25 years in. So we might assume the 25-year person might be retiring next year, and the new hire is retiring maybe 25 years from now. Mm-hmm. So they're not all retiring on the same calendar date, but under the same set of assumptions. And the problem is we have a stream of payments. For that older retiree, it's going to start, our employees going to start right away and go for the next 25 years perhaps, or 30 years until he dies. And then for the other person, it won't start for another 25 years and then go for maybe 30 years after that. So we have this stream of payments we expect to happen, including a certain percent will become disabled, a certain percent will quit and never get a real pension. They'll just get their money back. And then with the stream of payments, then we have to discount it back into today's dollars. And that's where the 7.5% discount rate comes in. And that's why the higher the rate, the smaller the liability. And so once we discount it back, we say, okay, here's a present value. And the question is, how much money do we have in the pot? The problem is we only have half the money that we need to fully fund the liabilities. Therefore, we're only 50% funded, roughly. And we got to make up that other $10 million that we're short. How do we do that? We ask you for $600,000 per year for the next 20 years or so, and we hope to get it funded. And then reality intervenes and says, that's a great assumption. This year you're not going to earn 7.5%. You're going to maybe lose money this year. So next year, unfunded liability will go up, the payment will go up, and hopefully the year after that, the market does better and the contribution comes down. But that's basically what our evaluation is about.
Let me ask you this: what affects the discount rate? Is it the prime rate? Is there other variables that actuaries take into account to try to figure out the present value of future cash flows?
Yeah, actually, I can leave 3 pages from another presentation I did this afternoon when they asked the question in an interview, how do you set your discount rate? It is based on an expectation of what we think is going to happen in the future. We'll look backwards, but we're really looking into the future. And I think you saw a GASB page before showing how your money is invested in different categories, different percentages, with the real rate of return, before inflation. And basically, we're trying to come up with what we think is going to happen in the long term. Long term might be next 30 years. Rates of return based on this investment mix with some underlying inflation assumption, which may be about 3% in this particular plan. And so the hard part is, so what do you think stocks are going to earn? What do you think bonds are going to earn? We know what bonds are earning today. What will they earn in the future? There's no concept of what a stock is earning today. I mean, it's what it earned last year. So we asked for the advice of the investment advisor. We look at what other plans are doing. So it isn't just, let's do a survey. What's everybody else doing? Is everybody else doing about 7.75? Okay, well, but that's not an answer. That's just a survey. You don't set assumptions based on surveys because they may be invested differently than you're invested. One day you may want to be invested more conservatively, in which case we'll lower the discount rate. Whether that's appropriate, that's the way the current rules work. So we're really just trying to ask the investment advisors and look around what everybody else thinks and then what the board's comfortable with on the investment mix and expected return by asset class. Sort of multiply the mix with the returns and we come up with the rate. And one day maybe we'll be more conservative, maybe we'll even be below that. But right now I think We're at 7.5, which is in the range of reasonableness. Certainly, you have a lot of company, the state's above that rate, but we'd like to gradually lower it some.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Mail?
Thank you for being here again. I don't know what arbitrage is. What's arbitrage?
Oh, sorry. So if you can float a loan, pension obligation bond, where you're going to pay 2.5% on it, and maybe it's a tax-free bond, and then you could put it into the pension plan, and the pension plan can buy Treasury security at 3%. You win. It's guaranteed. That's arbitrage. You get a money machine. So let's borrow.
Prohibited.
So it's also prohibited too. Yes. But let's borrow $1 billion because we can just make a money machine. But leverage, on the other hand, is I borrow money and put it in a risky investment, and I take the risk hoping to reap the return, but it's not guaranteed. So arbitrage is a risk-free transaction, which the Congress obviously said, gee, I'm not going to let you float, tax-free bonds just to, buy my bonds or something else to make money off of it. That's not what this was intended for. This was for building roads and things.
So it would be illegal for us to borrow money to pay off our pension loan?
Oh, no. You just couldn't invest. You can't. You probably, the pension obligations bonds probably can't be tax-free bonds. They probably could be taxable bonds, but I'm not giving tax advice. And we're probably not going to be able. We're probably going to invest it like pension board would probably invest it like all the other assets in stocks and bonds, which means there's no guarantee that you'll earn more than what you're going to have to pay on the bonds. That's all. So I use the word leverage when I talk about pension obligation bonds to make it clear that this is a risky transaction, not a risk-free transaction.
If you could walk me through page 3 has investment income, realized gain, and unrealized loss. Unrealized gain, unrealized loss. So 217,000, 66,000, and 56,000.
Sorry.
And then the next page has a summary of 2015, 14, 13, and 12, and an overall investment gain or loss. And I'm just trying to understand first whether the numbers for page 3 on the asset statement.
This is the valuation report. I only have my slides show here. Is that?
I just bring it on.
You want?
Oh, yeah, you can have.
Okay. So, right. Page 3 is just repeating information we get from the finance department, where they show us the assets of the plan. Okay. So the for the year on the investment income side. There's a number there of $217,000. That'll be like interest and dividends. Mm-hmm. And the other numbers are market appreciation. Stock prices went up or down. Some they sold and realized, some they didn't sell. So on a market value basis, you add those three numbers up, 217,066 and 156. So that's going to be $400 and some odd thousand. Yep. Now on the next page, and $400,000 on $10 million is not 7.5%. So you were short of the return of the expected return for that particular year. On page 4, what we show you, there's a number there under 2015 of $358,000. That's how much you were short of the 7.5% target. So what we're doing here is we're not taking all your gains and losses, but just how much you are above or below the return, and we're going to, for funding purposes, smooth out those investment gains and losses and defer recognition of 80% of this year's loss. Now, while this year's loss was $358,000, the prior years had big gains that we were.
Just go slower.
I'm sorry.
So on page 4, the $358,000 is the amount that we didn't make. We expected to make X dollars, and we came up $358,000 short. Right. And conversely, the previous year, we expected to make a much larger amount. I'm sorry, we expected to make a much smaller amount and made about $700,000 more than we expected.
Exactly.
So collectively, over 4 years, that's about $1 million more than expected and about $800,000 less than expected. So our investments have outperformed expectations by about $200,000.
Yes. Unfortunately, 2008, 2009 are no longer within the last 5 years.
Because those are really bad years?
Those are really bad years.
Really bad years.
Unfortunately, 2016 is not on the page yet.
Yeah.
But then again, we're not done yet.
Sure. And so that's a little, I'm just trying to, basically what I'm trying to understand is 7.5%, are we making a reasonable estimate? Are we investing? Is our investments performing as we expect them to? And what this chart tells me is that if you look over at least a 4-year set of years, you see something that's not wildly out of kilter with what we were expecting.
That's right.
And is there a reason to report 4 years as opposed to 6 or 8 or 10?
The asset smoothing method, which is what this chart is about, is what do we use for funding purposes? What do we sort of pretend the assets are so we don't have to deal with the ups and downs of the stock market? We smooth out returns over a 5-year period. 5 is pretty standard. If we're smoothing returns, deferring recognition over a 10-year period, it's sort of too long.
Right.
So 5 is a pretty well accepted, the most common asset smoothing period. Now, the real value is the market value, but for funding, we want to smooth it. 5 is common, and there's only 4 here because the 5th year is now 100% recognized, 0% deferred. But this is that 2011 year, this is the first year where it's been fully recognized, but it therefore isn't on the chart.
So if our fund was created in 2001, I believe. So if I jump back and looked at your audits from each year, I would see a progression back to 2001 of this table, investment gain and loss, and I could calculate a 15-year, 14-year. Are we generally over 14 years? Have we outperformed expectations or underperformed expectations?
That's a really good question. I think you're pretty close to dollar weighted because 2002 was not a good year. Back then, you didn't have any money.
Oh, I don't need you to calculate it in your head right now. I'm just saying. I'm just saying hypothetically, I could do that.
Yes. I'm telling you what I expect the result to be.
What was the number in 2004? In July?
4 was a good year, I think, but 2 was not a good year.
Thank you. The last question is, with the models you use and the assumptions that you make to build all of this, could you project out when our because at some point we accumulate a pool of retirees and disabled officers, but there's also deaths because that happens, and we continually have new recruits coming in. So at some point, I'm assuming the pool stabilizes. The expected outflows of money to pay pension liability, to pay pensions and to pay disability, stop rising. So, if one wanted to, if one looked 10 years out or 20 years out, you'd eventually see the liability, I'm assuming, other than inflation, you'd see it sort of, stop growing, more or less. Right, because we only have 40-ish officers, so we're never going to have more than 40 on duty at any one time.
Right, but your number of retirees will increase. I mean, you'll probably at some point have more retirees than active employees in the plan.
But at some point, right?
At some point, right. It might
we're planning to celebrate our 400th anniversary at some point, so...
Well, within the next 10 years, might you have more retirees than actives? You might. Right. You might within 10 years. I would definitely, I'd say sometime in that 10 to 15-year range, you probably will cross over. It might be more. In terms of cash flow, you're bringing in between employer and employee contributions $1.2 million, $1.3 million in contributions, and you're paying out $785,000. So you have positive cash flow. You're not having to sell investments to pay the benefits. That's largely because you have a large unfunded liability. That's requiring a lot of cash to come into the plan. One day when the unfunded liability gets paid off in about 20 years, your contributions will hopefully drop if the market hangs in there in the long term, and you'll be paying the normal costs, and you'll go negative. But then be using the assets you've accumulated to pay most of the benefits and not so much the contributions coming in. But that's probably 15, 20 years out before that happens.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I just had a question I think relates to Councilmember Mail and Councilmember Schultz. It's page 7 that looks at our schedule of active participants.
Yes.
And I was curious how we should look at this chart and what are the limitations of it?
One of our standards of practice that we're required to display information on the census that we use to develop the valuation. So this is we put this in the report because it's a requirement. Almost any actual pension valuation, you'll see what the active participants look like, not their names, not their social security numbers, but by age and by service, how many are in each age service cell, and what their average pay is. So what I'm looking at, what I would notice is that their average age is 38, not particularly high. General employees is probably higher than that. Their average service is 10 years. I see a lot that are in that 10 to 12 range. On average, they got another 15 years to go, probably, before they retire. They were hired on average at age 28, which is about right for a public safety group. General employees, you're going to get more late career hires. There are an occasional, there's an occasional late second career hire in the police department, probably far fewer than the others. So in the 1 to 4 year column, you'll see some that are in their 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So not many, but a few. Maybe it's a second job. One looks like they have a higher pay, so maybe that's someone who comes in as chief, but they had their first career somewhere else. But mostly they sort of follow a diagonal. They start in their 20s and they sort of work their way down. So this chart looks like most of the charts I see for public safety plans. Same average age, same average service, same kind of distribution.
Okay, City Manager?
Yeah, just actually following up on that first. Was it you that was bringing up an issue too about, though, that we, by having more women in our police force, it was changing some of the?
Oh, no, I wouldn't.
No. Some of the expectations.
Gender to us is women live longer than men.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the liability would be a little bit higher. On the other hand, you're retiring at such a young age to public safety, it's not that important. Meaning that if you're retiring when you're 50 years old, you're going to live a lot of years, whether you're a man or a woman. So the fact that they may live till 85 or 87 when they're retiring at 50 isn't like they're retiring at 65 and going to live to 85 or 87. It's just not.
Okay.
Not
Just wanted to check on that
Yeah.
one. I guess I wanted to just make two observations or 2 points. One is that we have pension board meetings, and they are open to the public. They're very interesting. We have 2 residents who are on the pension board who are very knowledgeable. They really do a wonderful service for the citizens of Tacoma Park in their service. And so that's something that you might be interested sometime in either talking with them or coming to one of the meetings. The other thing is it doesn't affect the numbers that you've seen here, but this year the council did put in $100,000 additional contribution. And so perhaps you could just explain, did that make any will that make any difference, and what kind of thing might we see next year as a result of adding the extra $100,000?
So instead of the unfunded liability being $10 million, it's now $9,900,000. And you'll get a little bit of a smaller amortization payment next year because that money comes in. That might translate to $7,000 or $8,000 reduction in the contribution on an annual basis. So it's every little bit helps. So if you have $10 million, we'd be happy to.
So
wait, just our budget.
So $100,000 saves $7,000 per year in future amortized costs. Is that what you just said?
Something like that. Yes.
Great. Any other questions? No. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Great. We have one other presentation tonight from the provost, vice president provost of Montgomery College. I just want to let people know, because we can't see while we're in this room, I'm getting texts and emails that the roads are very bad.
Yeah.
Out there. But given that you're here, and given that we have the vice president and the provost of Montgomery College here, I just wanted to acknowledge that. If people want to go home, this is being recorded. I would like to proceed this evening with this presentation, since we are all here. So.
And may be here the rest of the night.
Yes.
Didn't the city manager say they were setting up cots somewhere in the building?
Yes.
I think they're really uncomfortable, actually.
I'm not quite talented enough to talk to you and do this at the
Okay.
same time, so you have to give me a second to find this. I saved it on a thumb drive with a bunch of files. All of a sudden, it looked alike. There it is.
Can I just ask the city manager one question on the last subject?
Uh-huh.
Is it possible for us to perform essentially an equal pay for equal work analysis of our staff? So to look at wage by years of service and gender, and come up with some sort of analysis?
I don't know. Can I talk to you a little bit about it and just?
Yeah, there's no rush.
Okay.
Wonderful. You ready?
Mayor Stewart and council members, thanks for the invitation to appear here tonight. It gave me a chance to practice my winter driving skills. It actually took me almost 40 minutes to get here from our east garage down here, which is about 6 blocks. I should have walked so far. Here tonight to share the latest draft of our facilities master plan for the college. And we'll talk about what that master plan is, what it does for us in just a moment. But I do want to mention, first of all, we have been engaged in a timeline that I believe was in your packet that we shared with you guys about what we've been doing for about the last, well, since July 27th to put this facilities master plan together. I keep referring to it as a draft because our Board of Trustees will vote on it next Monday night. And so I'm not at liberty to distribute the plan because there may be changes between now and then. And so I'm sorry I can't give you a final copy, so to speak, because it doesn't yet exist. In fact, I believe Dr. Pollard, the president of the college, was making changes in what the board was going to see yesterday afternoon still. So you can see the timeline here. We first met, I believe, it was actually my birthday, with a group of members of the community for some input on September 10th of this year. And then we scheduled another meeting that we had on December 14th of this year. At the December 10th meeting, largely what we did is go over what we thought was going to be a very similar version of the plan. By the time we got to the 14th, some things had changed, but there were no new projects in the plan. So let's talk about what a facilities master plan is for a community college in Maryland. Very simply, it's a roadmap for our capital projects. Our capital projects are funded roughly in a 50-50 split between the county and the state. And so the state, particularly or specifically the Maryland Higher Education Commission, requires that we do facilities master plans, update them every 5 years, and make a new one every 10 years. And what that does is, for them, provide some insurance that we will be able to have enough space to do our business, to fulfill our mission. Mainly, that comes down to, do we have enough classroom and office and other types of space for the college to operate, which depends upon our enrollment figures. So basically, we're presented with MHEC every 10 years with a problem that they want a solution for. They want us to tell them how we're going to have enough space in order to do our business. And so this plan is just that. It's a roadmap about how we're going to get there. This is my second facilities master plan since I've been at the Tacoma Park Silver Spring campus. It was a great plan from fiscal 2006 to fiscal 2016, except that we built hardly anything on the plan because of fiscal concerns and constraints from the county and the state. The whole idea was that we were going to build a new, well, let me show you here. Here's the thing. The idea was that we were going to build a new math and science facility, that we were going to build a new library resource center, and we were going to try to pay some attention to our gymnasium as well. And we got funding for none of that. We got funding from Montgomery County to do the Commons renovation building, and we got funding from Montgomery County to do Pavilion number 3, which will open on Monday. And that was basically it. So we're planning to just pick up where we left off with 2013 to 2023 plan. And then, after listening to the members of the community and some of their concerns, our architects took those concerns to heart and created a new plan.
Could you stay on that last slide with the bar chart just for 1 second?
Sure. Which one? Oh, the old one?
Right there. That,
The bar chart
one more.
one.
Oh, the bar chart.
Just give me 10 seconds. Thanks.
So what you can see there is that we have done fairly well in providing space for most of our programs, but you'll see the real problem is in the math and science area. That's where we're hurting the most. Our math and science facilities, Councilmember Kovar's been in them. Some of them go back to the 60s, and the others go back to the 70s. They actually look like Frankenstein's laboratory. They don't look like a modern math and science facility. And then here is the relevant slide. This is what we're proposing to submit to MHEC after our Board of Trustees approves it from the 2013 to 2023 Facilities Master Plan. We're using 2013 as a starting point because that's where the last time we have accurate data on enrollment, et cetera. And so what we've done basically is in the master plan from 06 to 16, we were going to build a science and math facility in 2 phases. We were going to tear down Science South, build a laboratory building, and then we were going to tear down Science North in another phase and build a classroom and office facility. It would have taken 2 years to design it, would have taken 4 years to build it. Our architects came up with a better solution. They said if we tear down Science South and Falcon Hall at the same time, that we can cut 2 years off of the time it would take to bring the building online for our students. And so that's the main difference there. You'll see down in the corner, towards the corner of Fenton Street and Tacoma Avenue. And then they also decided that if they created a building in between the student center and what is now the current library, that they could build a library facility without causing any difficulty in terms of operating our current library. So the books could stay in the current library, and we could build a new facility that was hooked directly to the student center. And then we could move from the old library building into that particular facility. We're also planning to build an additional building there, and this one here. Now, what's important about all of this is that it allows us to reduce the scale of the buildings we were proposing to build. So our architects responded to a lot of concerns by building the Maths and Science Center in one phase. It allows us to build it on a larger footprint, and it allows us to build a building which is a story less in height. So it's not a 4-story building now, it's a 3-story building. And then it allows us to build smaller buildings. The library building will be smaller than we were proposing to build in the 06-16 plan. And the building that will be directly across from Pavilion 3, we're calling it a math building right now, for lack of a better name, would also be smaller. The building on would face onto New York Avenue. So that's basically the differences in the plan from 06 to 16 and from 13 to 23. So I'm ready for questions. I know that was quick.
So is this what you're going to be presenting to the board next week?
Unless there have been some changes that were made today about which I am unaware.
And then could you just clarify us what exactly is the vote the board is taking?
The vote that the board is taking is to, this is just a small section of the facilities master plan for the college. Mm-hmm. There's one for each campus. There's also one for our workforce development, continuing education operation, and some other facilities that the college operates. And so this is just one small chapter in a much larger document, and that's what the board will be voting on.
Councilmember Kovar?
Thanks. Yes. So after the board votes, I just want to make sure I understand how this works. Then, and that's on the 25th, right,
Yep.
of this month. Then it gets referred by February 1st or right after the 25th to
So
the state commission?
The Maryland Higher Education Commission is expecting us to deliver the plan to them on February 1st.
And then what's their timing?
They'll spend a lot of time making sure they go through it. I don't know what their exact time frame is, but they'll go through it, and then they'll give us a go-ahead the next time we get funding or ask for funding for a project through the state.
But do they have to vote on it as a commission?
I do not know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so that'll be good to know. And if so, when?
Okay.
So the question is, if you submit the plan to them, or your board submits the plan to them, can it be changed, or is it just they accept it, or they don't accept it, or?
They accept it, and remember, it's a roadmap. It's what we're planning to do.
Right.
But when it actually comes down to working on project by project, we have to make sure that the governor allocates enough money to the community colleges so that we get our share of the 50% of what we need, and then we also at the same time have to make sure that we get the 50% from the county. And so we have a capital improvement plan from both organizations, from both the state and the county, and we consciously have to work with them and make sure that they're both in agreement that they're going to fund those projects in that particular year in the plan.
So if the city or residents or the city council or the municipal government or in some way our community has concerns about this, can we affect what the master plan looks like?
Actually, the idea is not to affect the master plan. The key thing is to affect each project as it's built. The college has a long history of working closely with the community on all of our new buildings during the project phase.
Right, but say, for example, if you look at the map, there's been discussion in the past about having some of the expansion of the campus to the extent that it's needed taking place in the area, I would sort of say across East-West Highway on the Georgia Avenue area where the Arts Center is, for example, and there is that open space there. So it's one thing to say we can engage on the buildings in yellow in terms of height and design and things like that, but what about if we have concerns, which I personally do, that the open space on the other side of Georgia Avenue isn't used? Do we have the ability to impact that, or is it it's this set of buildings and that's it?
So we are proposing to build a mass science center on the site that you just referenced. Right. We didn't get to do that in the last master plan because the funding wasn't available for us. And so we might have to decide when it comes time to do that particular part of that particular project that there might need to be some modifications. It is possible, I don't know how likely it would be, to move over to the West Campus and build it on the parking lot there. We might be given funding from the state and the county to do that rather than to build it where we're proposing to. That's where the input comes in.
I don't want to monopolize all the questions, but I think that illustrates what my concern is about our lack of having an opportunity to really weigh in on this before, once the decisions are made. It feels like they're made in a way that will limit our ability to influence it going forward, because potential construction on the other side of Georgia Avenue will be closed off to a large extent based on this serving as the roadmap.
If I had a crystal ball, I might be able to give you an answer to that question, but nothing in here is closed off.
Right, but I mean, but I don't have a crystal ball either, but it seems like things that are in the plan are more likely to happen than things that aren't. And so if we're told that this is what it looks like, that's unlikely to happen. Let me ask you this, and then other people can ask questions. Does this plan have to go through the county planning process?
The plan does not. Each project that we build does go through Park and Planning.
So at one of the
process.
meetings I was at, there was a person from the county planning who said that it did. So how does that,
So
how do you answer that?
our attorney and legal department have consulted with Park and Planning's legal department, and we have agreed that what he said was incorrect. So we're not submitting the plan to Park and Planning, nor are they expecting us to.
Okay. Do other people want to ask?
Yeah, I just have a question. I know the Board of Trustees meetings are open meetings, but I just checked their agenda. Will this discussion be done in an open meeting on Monday evening?
There will be a discussion of it in part of the meeting that's the open session. They will also probably, since it's a possible real estate matter, et cetera, may have a conversation about it in the closed part of the meeting as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Schultz.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm just puzzled about one thing, because one of the things you said when you were at the outset of your comments was that you really, because the plan still isn't finished as far as you know, the president might still be tinkering with it. You can't really bring it here tonight and say, here is the final draft of the master plan that we're submitting to the trustees. Which I understand what you're saying. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But what I want to find out though is that were you to have been able to bring that plan because you had been given permission to do it because it was ready, what would we be able to see that we're not being able to see tonight? In other words, what is the stuff that lies behind this illustration right here that is going to be undoubtedly the real meat that the trustees are going to want to sink their teeth into?
If I was a betting man, I would bet this is what they'll vote on and approve. But I can't be 100% sure of that.
Oh, okay.
Our trustees are all independent thinkers and community leaders, and they may, in the next couple of days, while they're looking at this, decide that they may have come up with a better idea. And then they would direct the president of the college to make it so. So, but I suspect that, they've been exposed to this. They've seen it for about a month now. This is what it looks like presently. So I am not anticipating any substantial, huge changes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for coming tonight and presenting this to us. I had a question about you started off the presentation talking about the community meetings that you had. How many meetings did you end up having, and what was the attendance at those?
We had 2 meetings. The first one was more people showed up at the Tacoma Park Silver Spring meeting than the one at Rockville and the one at Germantown. I believe there might have been 20-plus folks in the room that night. The second meeting was less well attended.
Okay. And how do you communicate with the neighborhood around in the Tacoma Park campus?
We have a listserv of folks who live in the neighborhood, email list that we have put together over the years. And then the facilities folks sent letters, I believe, to everybody within a certain radius of the campus.
Okay. You have on the map here, on the plan, I see the daycare there, but that's not yellow. It looks like you're not planning to do anything with that?
Not at the present time.
Not planning in construction, but is it still going to remain as a daycare?
The daycare is still the process is under discussion right now about daycare at the entire college.
Okay.
So I can't make any commitments one way or the other about what will happen there.
Right. It gets back to community involvement, though. I just wondered to what extent you're keeping the community informed and involved in your planning there.
I do not know if there is a recommendation about that daycare center in the facilities master plan. We're currently discussing as a college what the appropriate provision of daycare is to meet the needs of our students. And we don't know the answer to that yet.
Okay. And is there, I guess, is there a way to involve community in the discussion? Because certainly if you're looking at campus-wide daycare needs, you may be talking about changing that particular facility significantly.
Again, this is still tentative sets
Right.
of discussions and things like that. That discussion has been whether or not we will continue to operate daycare at the Tacoma Park Silver Spring campus. If we choose not to do that, then we would probably look into the history of our ownership of the facility, and it might go on the market as a private real estate transaction, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
We would hire a realtor.
Let's keep.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I'm
Councilmember
not quite
Smith.
sure what happened to the screen here. but-
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor.
It takes a quarter.
Takes a quarter? Okay. I got two here.
Thank you, Brad, for coming this evening. Internally, did you guys decide that you should only have such a limited number of meetings with the community? How did you come to that conclusion?
I don't know the answer to that question, sir.
Okay.
I know that I received an email from the Central Facilities Office where that decision was made and indicated that we would have the first meeting. I think that is an MHEC requirement. We have at least one meeting, and then we had a second.
I think you can understand why a lot of the residents are anxious. I mean, this is a lot of development that's going to occur near residential homes. Is there any way for you guys to consider having more than the 2 meetings for the residents in Tacoma Park, Silver Spring, 1, and 2, the meetings that you had in Rockville and Gaithersburg, were they regarding this facility or?
No, the Rockville campus and the Germantown campus.
You're actually doing construction there also?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, I do think it would be appropriate to have more meetings for the residents, to talk to them and get their input about this construction, because it is going to change the face of their homes, their neighborhoods forever. And I assume that your population numbers for students at the campus are only going to grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you guys will do this project, and you'll probably have to do another one in the next few years, because there's so many kids going to, or young people, young adults going to the college. So I think it's very, very important that you talk to some of these residents and find out what is going to work for both parties.
We have been doing that. We did it in the 06 to 16 plan, and we had that plan that you can see in the presentation, and then we have the 13 to 23 plan, and we've had conversations about those with the neighbors on several occasions.
And I'm not saying you haven't, but residents wouldn't be here if they felt like their voice was not being heard.
But their voice was heard. In fact, the new plan and the changes from the September meeting to the December meeting about how we're going to go about this were substantial, and they were almost all based on addressing the neighbors' concerns. So we moved we tried to move. First of all, there was a lot of concern in the 06 to 16 plan about the height of the building of the Science and Math Center. It's going to be a story shorter than it was then. There was also concern about it being too close for a 4-story building to the folks that live on the other side of New York Avenue. We moved it down into the corner of the campus as far away as we could get on the East Campus and made it a lower building with a little bit wider footprint. So we have heard their concerns, and our architects heard them. and designed what we thought was a more elegant solution for the situation.
And is there a reasoning, a rationale, some internal document that you guys have of why you're not doing more development on Fenton or Georgia Avenue? Is it that you have to go on this site, or?
Excellent question. The Maryland Higher Education Commission requires that we design a solution for our enrollment projections on the property we already own.
Okay.
We cannot speculate that we would like to build on property that we might own in the future.
All right.
We can't do that.
Thank you.
That's their rule.
Councilmember Kovar?
So you mentioned stories several times, stories of the building, so and one story lower. What would be the height in feet above the street level?
We wouldn't know that until the design phase of the project. So when we hire an architect to design the new Math and Science Center, hopefully somewhere in the next 2 to 2.5 years, their decisions about how they can best fill a facility for us that serves our needs, they would decide whether it's a 12-foot height or a 15-foot story or whatever. That's a solution that they would come up with, not us. We can't put specific things like that in a master plan because it's a plan. When we have the project design phase, that's when those questions get answered.
So but the building, it looks like, would border or connect or abut with what I think is the Nunnally building, which is the student center.
That's the new resource library building.
Right.
Yeah.
So would that be around the same height as the Nunnally building, or lower, or is that again not clear at this point?
I cannot imagine it would be taller, but it would probably be pretty close to the same height. But that's just a provost guessing. I wouldn't know until we hired an architect and they did the design for us.
What about what Mr. Krastowski said about having substantial below ground for, say, the laboratories and so on? Is that something that could happen?
There is a story grade change between the Student Center and the corner where we're going with the new Math and Science Center. So I anticipate that we will build into that grade change, and that at the north end of that particular facility, that a story of it may actually be underground.
Okay. Just a couple other questions, and I'm sorry if on the State Commission meeting on whether the board meeting or the State Commission, is there an opportunity for public or representatives of the city to testify or present at that event? You can get back to us on that.
I believe that there is that if you want to comment at the public comment period at the Board of Trustees meeting on Monday night, that the ability to get on the agenda, that date may have already passed.
Actually, it did. I checked that, and I was wondering, given that this is the first time we've been able to have you at our meeting, is there any way, we're supposed to give 7 days notice, is there any way in particular if a member of our city council would like to comment during that public comment that we could make that happen?
I can check with the President's Chief of Staff, Steve Kane, to see if that's possible.
Yeah, because I think, as you said, sorry to take over your time, Councilmember Kovar, but I just want to make this one follow-up on this one point. As Councilmember Smith pointed out, there was one meeting in the Tacoma Park, Silver Spring area. Two? Okay. All right. So there was 2 meetings, and you said that was dictated by the Central Facilities Office, not necessarily your office?
They made the plan to hold those 2 meetings and consult with the community.
Yeah. So I think that is one thing that would, I'm sure we would like to communicate to the Board of Trustees that, in fact, we've had, as has been outlined here tonight, these agreements about collaboration, and then to only be holding 2 meetings that here are about something that is so important to our community, and the fact that it wasn't even built in for time for you to be able to come to the city council and present until we had to extend an invitation to you at such a late time, I think is something that we would like to communicate to the Board of Trustees, that moving forward, we would like to be able to have a much more back and forth and follow the collaborative agreement that we've set out
I will
before.
reach out to Dr. Kane to see if there is a provision for getting you on the agenda inside of the 7 days.
Okay.
I have no idea what the answer to that question is.
Thank you. Councilor Corvallis?
I will ask.
Reclaim my time. I don't have a crystal ball, but the answer should be yes to that. So make sure you tell them that. Okay. Two other questions.
You promoted me, I guess.
Yeah. Two other questions. Neighbors in North Tacoma tell me, who have kids at the school, at the daycare, that the teachers there are telling them it's closing in June. So if the teachers are saying that, either they're being disobedient, or they know something you don't, or you know something you don't want to tell us. So which of the three seems likely?
Well, actually, there's a fourth choice, and that is that we're not supposed to be discussing that decision in public until it's final.
Okay.
So someone's acting out of turn.
Okay.
Is that diplomatic enough?
Yes. But so we know the answer then. And I would just like to say that I think we should either testify or send a letter or do something along those lines. And I know there's not much time, and we can talk about it subsequently, but I'd urge us to do that. I obviously don't know what everybody else on the dais thinks about it, but I think expressing some concern, at least about the process.
So if I may, in the 2006-16 master plan, I was here to talk about that maybe about 9 years ago, and at that time, the council, I was able to convince the facilities people putting the master plan together to include the council's reaction to that master plan. And so it is in the current 06 to 16 master plan. I'm sure, knock on wood, that I can get a letter or a memo from you guys about your concerns about what you've expressed tonight, included in the final plan that would be taken to the Maryland Higher Education Commission.
So would we need to get that in? Sorry, would we need to get that in by the 25th, do you think? Or?
I don't think that the deadline would be that quick on that and stuff like this. We can figure out how to do that.
Councilmember Qureshi?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, sir, for being here. So my understanding is Dr. Stewart, isn't that correct?
That's fine.
Okay. I mean, you went to school for it. You might as well be called what you went to school for. So, Dr. Stewart, I understand as Vice President Provost, you also oversee operations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in your capacity as overseeing operations at this particular location, you've been involved in new facilities coming in, including the Student Services Center and a Visual Arts building. Is that right?
The Student Services Center was framed out as a building when I arrived in May of 2005. I worked on the Cultural Arts Center, which is our performing arts facility, as well as the K-Fritz Center, which is our visual arts building.
Okay, so it's safe to say that you have experience in this realm of expansion of your campus and building new facilities and expanding a campus that clearly is catering to some great students in our community. And I should note for the record that a number of us were at an MLK celebration just a few days ago where a young dreamer spoke to us about how your college was the only one that would allow him enrollment with his immigration status. So I say this with the comments I'm about to follow this with, that everybody on this city council, I think I can safely say, recognizes the virtue of your institution and the services it provides. I think the problem is, I think you mentioned that you were last here, is it 9 years ago?
No, I've been here several times since there. Mayor Williams invited me to appear in front of the council on a number of different occasions. I asked to be here a handful of times as well.
Okay, and I think, are you aware of the October 2015 resolution that the last city council passed on your master plan? What happened with that at your end? Was it communicated to the Board of Trustees and the powers that be?
Mhm.
And how was it communicated?
Well, I believe that you guys transmitted it directly to the president of the college.
Okay, and that's part of your discussion, among other things?
Mhm.
Okay. And I guess another thing that's sort of puzzling for me personally, and I'm the new kid on the block, so forgive my naivete on this issue, but I understand that there's an email list of notifications that go out to residents, many of whom are sitting here today.
Yeah, the Central Facilities Office has that list.
And, do you think it makes sense maybe to also communicate that message through the city council, through the mayor's office here, through the city manager?
I believe that the notification for those meetings was communicated to the city of Tacoma Park.
Okay. And I completely recognize, because I think the problem that people have with this process is that this is a plan about a plan. Kind of like I talk about at work, I don't like meetings about meetings. And I think what I'm really having a tough time understanding is, with 2 comment periods or community meeting periods for a master plan that's going to very drastically impact. I mean, not only do I recognize the virtue of your institution, but I think one thing that is an attraction for your location here is that it's located near Tacoma Park and Silver Spring, where there are communities that people want to live in, including your students. So what I don't understand is how a decision was made, and I think my colleagues have talked about this ad nauseum, why a decision was made to only have 2 meetings. I think in the future, it's important that these lines of communication remain open, because as Councilman Jarrett so aptly pointed out, this is not anybody's first rodeo on this issue, and it's not going to be the last one. And I think to encourage that this doesn't, that we don't have a problem in the future about the level of communication. I think communication is the key to ensuring your success, and more importantly, that dreamer's success and future dreamers that come to your institution. And I think a responsible expansion, which I completely agree that you're entitled to as your enrollment increases. But I think there is a level of frustration that I hear from even people in my ward who don't buttress up against your community about the level of communication or lack thereof. And we're all ears here to hear from you as somebody with this breadth of experience about how we can improve that. And if that means that we need to meet with you in your office on a regular basis for a period of time, then so be it. Because I think there just exists a level of frustration that shouldn't, because many people across this country love to move to places where there's colleges around in college towns, because I think we appreciate the virtue of colleges and the sense of community they bring. I just think that there needs to be done more in that regard. So I appreciate you coming here today.
Thanks. Mayor Williams and I met regularly, and I hope to establish that relationship with Mayor Stewart. I need a couple of times to send invitations to her so that we can meet. But Mayor Williams and I met several times a year. And when he invited me to the council, I came. Councilmember Siemens has been very generous with the college in supporting our ACES program. And I believe we've had a good and profitable relationship, but I will work harder to make it better.
Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Schultz?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to get back to a question I had earlier about the master plan.
Mm-hmm.
The underpinning of what you are showing us here, what you're going to be showing your trustees, has got to be a lot of analysis that is going on enrollment,
mm-hmm.
on the growth of enrollment, and that's doing projecting that's complicated and takes in all kinds of variables, on changes in curriculum, the kinds of studies that students are looking for, trying to make your institution as responsive as you can to the needs of the community and all that. Now, so that's part of the master plan. I mean, that's the narrative. That's the data that allows the presenter to the board to say, this is why we're doing this, why we have to do this, or why we want to do this, and this is, if we do it, we're going to be meeting Maryland Higher Education Commission's standards. But is there any way that kind of analysis can be made available or is available to the public, to the residents of this city, and to us, so that we can enjoy the knowledge of that as much as you do in your work on a daily basis?
Yeah, once the document is submitted to MHEC on February 1st, it becomes a public document. The 06 to 16 plan and all of that granular detail that you're asking for currently exists on our webpage.
Okay.
And I can provide you with a link if you need it.
Yeah.
But
Please do.
If you just go to montgomerycollege.edu and type facilities, central facilities into the search thing there, you'll get to the facilities master plan.
Okay, good. That's good to know.
Couple of clicks. The new one will be put up there as soon as we can.
One more comment, and that is, and I'm echoing now, I see some of the things that my colleagues have been saying, is that I appreciate the fact that you and Mayor Williams had your meetings in good faith. But I think we need, this is a different council, new mayor, lots of some new people here. Some of us are more connected into the history of the college than others of us. We need, and when I say we, I mean us and you, to be figuring out how we can work together on a regular basis, not just you're coming into this room and speaking to us. Because, see, I don't think you should have to be in the position where you are tonight of being effectively grilled about something that's here. When you come in here to our city council meeting to make a presentation, the way it should work is that we will already know what it is you're going to be presenting to us for the most part. Obviously, things change week to week, month to month. So that there's a real comfortable relationship. And then it allows us as city council members who have to talk, and we work with our constituents and interact with them and hear them, and it allows us to do our job better. And so that means then that everybody's getting more clued and on the same, the proverbial same page. And there's a sense here tonight that there's a certain dislocation between what you know and what the master plan says and what the residents who live near the school feel like they know. And our goal, and I say our, I mean yours and ours, ought to be to minimize and virtually nullify that as much as possible. Now, I know it's not possible to do that completely because yours is a very large institution, lots of moving parts, and almost no one, even the president, is in control or knowledge of everything, because that president has to rely on the people like yourself to help him or her understand the whole thing, and it's always changing. Everybody appreciates that. I just want us to be able to figure out how we can move forward in this sort of way. And I'd like you to leave here tonight with a thought in mind of figuring out a strategy, a methodology, helping us to work much more in sync, much more frequently. I mean, after all, our offices in this building are practically are really within walking distance of the college. It's not like you're in another state or in Baltimore or something. It ought to be really easy. And I'm sure we can, I'm very confident that we can do that. I mean, I think it'll benefit you. I mean, I just want to end by just saying is that, you, as Councilmember Qureshi was just saying, your institution is a very potent institution. You provide a tremendous service, educating an awful lot of people at a very affordable rate. Not to mention the number of people that you employ who now who are employed in Tacoma Park. So you're a key component to the welfare of this city. So it's in our selfish interest to make sure that you succeed as a university, but that you do it in a way that works for the community, the folks sitting in this room. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Message received, and I will figure out a way to come here regularly.
I just want to piggyback on a couple statements about working more closely between the college and the community. And one of the things that I think is important as well is city staff are very skilled planners, have a good sense about how the college not only fits within a neighborhood, but also with the larger community. And it's very useful. It may not be legally required to go through the mandatory referral process, but the discussions can be very useful. And we have, I think, staff that have very good insight. They know how to have the kind of meetings with the neighborhoods and with the other stakeholders that help provide real substantive suggestions that then the council can discuss and make an opinion on. And I think that that kind of input is something that would only improve the outcome of these proposals. As you said, it's an important component of our community. And it isn't, I think, good enough just to talk with exact neighbors of the institution, but also to have a wider city discussion about what the college should look like, how it should function. And those are things that we can either give good suggestions or we can be supportive of recommendations to the state. And all of these things, I think, can happen on a smoother basis. So I wanted to put a plug in for city staff also as part of the discussing points and assets that could be brought to improve a plan. Thanks.
Thank you. I see no other questions. It's getting late. Dr. Stewart, we do appreciate you coming this evening. I think I don't necessarily need to check with my colleagues because I'm sure that at least one of these points on us building a closer relationship is something we will do in the future. I appreciate you responding to our request to come this evening. And if I can just have my colleagues wait a few more minutes and we can talk about next steps and make sure we're in agreement. And if you can follow up on whether or not a member of our city council can testify on Monday evening, that'd be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. And don't worry about me getting grilled too much. I've been in more interesting situations. So thank you.
I worry more about your trip home.
Yeah, actually, I do want to mention we do have trucks out, but it is really dangerous. And so please, everyone, be careful.
Just before we ended tonight, there were two things on the table that I just want to make sure that we are in agreement with. One was, as Dr. Stewart said he would do, is to look into whether or not, and I'm just going to say it's going to be Councilmember Kovar, I would think, testifying Monday evening in front of the Board of Trustees. Is there any opinions on that, disagreements?
I think you should.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do it. I will have to miss the frequently already canceled several times council orientation session, so we'll have to
All
figure
right,
that
well,
out.
we'll
But
see that.
I would be willing to do that if people are up for it. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing was a letter to the Maryland Higher Ed Commission. It doesn't sound like that needs to be done by Monday, but I think moving forward on that sounded like something people were in favor of. Second that? Yep.
And it's probably better to do it after
you go attend the meeting.
After we see what the board does, because
Yes.
otherwise it would be
premature.
All right. Anything else for this evening? No? All right. We're adjourned.
Yay, we can go home.